Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if female Naruto had mermaid power, and fell in love with Nami, lesbian love. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Siren's Call. The sea was a beast, and tonight, it was enraged. Waves, tall as mountains and black as obsidian, clawed at the sky. Rain fell not in drops but in sheets, a relentless, driving curtain that blurred the line between ocean and air. Thunder was a physical blow, a deep-chested roar that vibrated through the water and into the very marrow of bone. At the heart of it all, where the wind screamed its highest, a lone figure stood, not on a ship, but on the churning surface of the water itself. Naruto Uzumaki drew a slow, deliberate breath. The saltwater spray on her lips was a familiar kiss, the gale whipping her crimson hair a wild caress. She lifted her hands, palms facing the heavens, and the sea answered her silent command. The monolithic wave cresting before her, poised to shatter and swallow the sky, paused. It hung there, a liquid mountain frozen in time, its watery skin trembling with contained fury. Naruto's eyes, a blue so vivid they seemed to generate their own light in the tempest's gloom, narrowed in concentration. She felt the currents, the immense, powerful arteries of the ocean, and she sang to them. Not with her voice, but with her will, a silent, resonant melody that spoke of calm, of peace, of slumber. Slowly, majestically, the waves sank back into the roiling hole. The wind's shriek softened to a mournful cry, then a whisper. The rain gentled. The beast was not tamed, merely placated, soothed by a will as ancient and profound as its own. Naruto let her arms fall, a faint smile touching her lips. This was her element, her playground, her home. The chaos of the Grand Line was just another temper tantrum, and she was the only one who could coax it back to reason. It was then, in the relative quiet that followed, that she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. It was the groan of tortured wood, the frantic snap of canvas, and beneath it all, faint but sharp, human shouts of desperation. Curiosity, a trait as ingrained in her as her power, pulled her forward. She didn't swim, not in the traditional sense. The water beneath her feet solidified, creating a fleeting path, a shimmering, liquid road that carried her over the swells faster than any ship could sail. She crested a wave and saw it, a small vessel, a caravel with a jaunty sheep's head figurehead that seemed to be bleeding in terror at the tumultuous sea. Its mast was splintered, its sails shredded, and it was being tossed about like a child's forgotten toy. Naruto's eyes scanned the deck. A figure in a straw hat was manically trying to steer the unresponsive rudder. A green-haired man with 3 swords at his hip was cutting away tangled rigging, his movements a blur of controlled fury. A long-nosed boy was bailing water with a bucket, his face a mask of panicked determination. A blond man in a suit was kicking at something, his leg wreathed in flame. It was a chaotic, desperate, yet strangely coordinated dance. They were fighters. Her attention, however, was snagged by a flash of orange hair. A young woman stood braced against the railing, her body language radiating a fierce, intelligent authority. She was pointing, shouting instructions, her voice sharp and clear even over the wind. A navigator, and a very good one, to have kept this tiny ship afloat this long. As Naruto watched, a rogue wave, a spiteful afterthought of the storm, slammed into the caravel's side. The ship lurched violently. The navigator lost her footing, her cry swallowed by the roar of the water as she was pitched over the railing and into the unforgiving sea. Naruto didn't think, she acted. The liquid path beneath her dissolved as she plunged into the depths. The water was her domain, and here, she was unmatched. Her legs fused together, the skin shimmering and elongating, forming a powerful, deep crimson tail that propelled her through the dark water with explosive speed. Gills, unseen moments before, opened on the sides of her neck, tasting the currents. The world shifted from a cacophony of air and wind to a symphony of pressure and flow. She saw the navigator, a fragile silhouette sinking into the abyss, her orange hair a fading ember in the gloom. Aya was already stealing the life from her, the cold leeching her strength, the pressure a crushing weight. Naruto reached her in seconds, her arms wrapping around the woman's waist. She was surprisingly light, yet solid, real. Naruto kicked powerfully with her tail, rocketing them towards the surface. They broke through into the rain-swept air with a gasp. Nami, for that was her name, coughed violently, spitting out saltwater. Her body trembling from the shock and the cold. Her brown eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and confusion, fixed on Naruto. She took in the sight before her, the unnaturally blue eyes. The crimson hair plastered to a sharp, angular face, and, most shocking of all, the powerful, scaled tail that kept them both afloat. What are you? Nami choked out, her voice raspy. Someone who doesn't like watching people drown, Naruto replied, her tone straightforward, her grip firm and reassuring. Hold on. She swam towards the battered caravel, her movements fluid and impossibly fast. On deck, the chaos had momentarily ceased. The crew was staring, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and suspicion. The swordsman had his hand on one of his katanas. Nami, the straw-hatted boy yelled, his voice a mix of relief and alarm. Naruto reached the side of the ship. A little help here, she called out, her voice carrying easily over the waves. The blond man was the first to react, throwing a rope ladder over the side. With one arm still securely around Nami, Naruto grabbed the ladder. The transition was seamless. The moment her torso was clear of the water, her tail split apart, reforming into two strong, toned legs. She climbed the rest of the way with Nami in her arms and deposited her gently onto the wet deck. Nami scrambled away from her, her back hitting the mast. She was breathing hard, her eyes still locked on Naruto, a deep, primal fear warring with the gratitude she knew she should feel. She had spent years under the thumb of a fish man, a monster from the sea. And now, she had been saved by something that was undeniably not human. Thank you, Nami said, the words feeling stiff and inadequate in her mouth. Her gaze flickered down to where the tail had been, then back up to Naruto's face. The wariness was a physical thing, a wall between them. Naruto simply nodded, unbothered. She understood the fear of the unknown. She'd seen it 100 times before. She turned her attention to the ship, her keen eyes taking in the splintered mast, the damaged rudder. You're not going anywhere like this, she stated, a matter-of-fact observation, not a judgment. We know that. The long-nosed boy, Usopp, squeaked. We're in the middle of a storm, in case you hadn't noticed. The storm, which had been momentarily calmed by Naruto's influence, was beginning to stir again. The waves regaining their menacing height. Naruto ignored him, her gaze fixed on the churning sea. She could feel its rhythm, its petulance. She closed her eyes, extending her senses. There's a cove, a calm one, about 5 kilometers northwest of here. The currents will fight you the whole way. And how would you know that? The swordsman, Zoro, asked, his voice a low growl of suspicion. Naruto opened her eyes and met his gaze, a spark of challenge in her own. Because the currents told me. She didn't wait for their disbelief. She walked to the bow of the ship, her bare feet steady on the pitching deck. She raised her hands, not in the grand, placating gesture she'd used before, but with a sharp, commanding motion. The water in front of the Going Merry, for that was its name, she noted from the inscription, began to change. A channel, a path of eerily calm water, began to form, cutting directly through the raging waves. It was as if an invisible god had drawn a line in the sea, declaring, "Here, there shall be peace." "Steer for that," Naruto commanded, her voice ringing with an innate authority that cut through the crew's astonishment. "Keep the ship in the channel, and you'll be fine." Luffy, the captain, just stared, his mouth agape. Then a huge, impossibly wide grin split his face. "Awesome. You're amazing. Join my crew." Nami, still huddled by the mast, watched it all unfold. She saw the raw, unbelievable power that emanated from the red-haired woman. It was a power that dwarfed Arlong's brutish strength, a power that treated the Grand Line's fury as a minor inconvenience. And it terrified her. Power like that was always used to control, to dominate, to destroy. Yet, they were moving. The ship, guided by Luffy's now functional steering, slid into the calm channel. The violent rocking ceased, replaced by a smooth, forward glide. The waves crashed and roared on either side of them, held back by an unseen, benevolent force. This woman, this mermaid, had not demanded payment. She had not made threats. She had simply saved them. The contradiction was a knot in Nami's stomach. As they sailed through the storm's heart, safe within their bubble of tranquility, a new threat emerged. A shadow, vast and deep, rose from the depths beneath them. A head, larger than the Going Merry itself, broke the surface. It was a sea king, a behemoth of the deep. Its eyes baleful lanterns in the gloom, its maw a cavern of jagged teeth. It had been drawn by the storm's fury, and it was not pleased by the unnatural calm. Usopp screamed. Sanji cursed, dropping into a fighting stance. Zoro drew his swords, a grim smile on his face. Luffy's grin widened. Food. But Naruto held up a hand. Wait. She walked to the railing, unafraid, and leaned over. Looking directly into the creature's colossal eye. The Sea King let out a roar that shook the very timbers of the ship, a sound of pure, primal rage. Naruto didn't flinch. She simply met its gaze and, once again, she sang her silent song. It was a different melody this time, not of calm, but of respect, of understanding. You are mighty, the song whispered into the creature's ancient mind. You are the king of this domain. But these small, fragile lives mean you no harm. They are merely passing through. Let them go. The Sea King's roar died in its throat. It blinked its massive eye, a slow, reptilian gesture. A low rumble, more curious than angry, vibrated through the water. It looked from Naruto to the ship, then back to Naruto. It seemed to recognize something in her, a kinship. A power that was not a challenge to its own, but a part of the same, ancient world. With another low rumble, the Sea King sank back beneath the waves, disappearing into the dark. Silence descended on the deck, broken only by the sound of the rain and the steady progress of the ship. The entire crew stared at Naruto, their weapons half drawn, their minds reeling. Nami pushed herself to her feet, her legs still unsteady. She walked towards the bow, her eyes never leaving the crimson-haired woman. She saw a power that could command the sea, a presence that could pacify its greatest monsters. It wasn't the destructive, hateful power she had known. It was something else. Something protective. Something beautiful. For the first time since being pulled from the water, a flicker of nothing other than fear sparked in Nami's chest. It was a dangerous, unfamiliar feeling, one she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Fascination. Naruto turned from the sea, her work done, and her eyes met Nami's. She offered a small, confident smile. See, told you it would be fine. Nami didn't smile back, but the hard, defensive line of her shoulders softened almost imperceptibly. The ship slid out of the storm and into the promised cove, the water as still and clear as glass. The beast was sleeping now. And its master, she was standing right in front of her. Far away, in a throne room built from the bones of leviathans and illuminated by the bioluminescence of abyssal creatures, a man with eyes as cold and dark as the crushing deep looked up from a swirling pool of water. He had felt it, a surge of hydrokinetic energy, a signature he had not felt in years. A signature he had thought long extinguished. A cruel smile stretched his lips. So, Kale, the Abyss Emperor, whispered to the oppressive silence. The last Uzumaki lives, he chuckled, a sound like stones grinding together in the deep. The game, it seems, is not over yet. Chapter 1 End. Here is the second chapter of your story. Chapter 2. The Shipwright and the Sea Witch. Dawn broke over the hidden cove, painting the placid water in hues of soft rose and brilliant gold. The fury of the storm was a distant memory, a nightmare that had faded with the coming of the light. The air was clean, washed by the rain, and carried the scent of salt and the damp earth of the nearby island. On the deck of the Going Merry, however, the mood was far from serene. The light of the new day was unforgiving, revealing the full extent of the damage the caravel had suffered. The mainmast was a jagged spear of splintered wood, its upper half gone. A casualty of the tempest's rage. Rigging lay entangled, useless heaps, like severed nerves. Deep gouges scarred the railings, and the deck was a mess of debris. The ship, which was more a home than a vessel to its crew, looked wounded, broken. Luffy, his usual boundless optimism momentarily muted, poked at the splintered base of the mast. "Can we fix it, Usopp?" Usopp, his face grim, ran a hand over the fractured wood. "Fix it, Luffy, this needs more than a hammer and some nails." The mast is the ship's spine. It's shattered. We need a proper shipwright. A master. Zoro, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed, was not looking at the mast. His single, sharp eye was fixed on the figure sitting at the bow of the ship. Naruto was perched on the head of the Mary's sheep figurehead, her legs dangling, her crimson hair a vibrant slash of color against the morning sky. She seemed utterly at peace, one with the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. She had been there since sunrise. A silent, watchful presence. To Zoro, she was like a hawk perched on a branch, beautiful, powerful, and fundamentally a predator. He had seen what she could do, and while it had saved them. That kind of power was a variable he didn't understand and therefore didn't trust. What about her? Zoro grunted, nodding in Naruto's direction. She can talk to the ocean. Maybe she can ask it to spit us out a new mast. Sanji, emerging from the galley with a tray of steaming mugs, shot Zoro a glare. Don't be an ass, moss head. The lady saved our lives. And Nami swans. He glided over to the railing, his demeanor shifting instantly to one of chivalrous charm. Mademoiselle, a morning coffee to warm you after your ordeal. Naruto turned, a faint, amused smile on her lips. Her blue eyes seemed to catch the morning light and hold it. Thank you, Sanji-san. She hopped down from the figurehead, her movements fluid and sure-footed on the cluttered deck. She took the offered mug, her fingers brushing his, and the cook nearly melted into a puddle of hard-eyed goo. Nami came up from the map room below deck, her face etched with worry. She had spent the last hour poring over her charts, trying to pinpoint their exact location and find a viable solution to their predicament. She pointedly avoided looking at Naruto, instead addressing the group. Okay, I think I know where we are. According to the currents and the last known heading before the storm hit, we're about a day's sail from the Whispering Shoals archipelago. Usopp's eyes lit up. Whispering Shoals. I've heard of that place. They say it's a neutral port, famous for its craftsmen. Shipwrights, blacksmiths, artisans of every kind. Exactly, Nami confirmed, tapping a point on the map she'd brought up. It's our best bet. If we can find a master shipwright there, we might be able to save the Mary. The problem is, she added, her brow furrowing, getting there. Without a mainsail, we'll be at the mercy of the currents. It'll be slow, and it'll be dangerous. Naruto took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze drifting from Nami's determined face to the open sea beyond the cove's mouth. The currents don't have to be your enemy. All eyes turned to her. Nami's jaw tightened. It was one thing to accept this woman's help in a life-or-death situation. It was another entirely to rely on her, to make her a part of their plans. It felt like inviting the sea itself, with all its beautiful, terrifying unpredictability, onto their ship. What do you mean? Nami asked, her tone clipped and professional, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. This archipelago, Naruto said, walking over to look at the map Nami had spread on a crate. It creates a complex system of eddies and undercurrents. Most ships have to navigate a long, winding path to avoid the dangerous ones that can pull you onto the reefs. She traced a finger over the water, not on the paper, but an inch above it, as if she could feel the topography of the ocean floor through the air. But there's a deep channel, an artery. It flows directly towards the main island. It's fast, but it's narrow and hidden. No map would show it. Zoro's suspicion flared. And you just happen to know about this secret, super fast underwater highway. I don't know about it, Naruto replied, turning her clear blue eyes on him, her gaze unwavering. I can feel it. It's there, waiting. It can carry you. Luffy's eyes were wide with wonder. Like a sea train. Shishishi. That sounds awesome. Let's do it. Nami hesitated. Her Navi. Gator's instincts screamed that what Naruto was describing was impossible. Currents were forces of nature, things to be predicted, compensated for, and respected, not ridden like a trained horse. But her memory, still vivid and terrifying, of Naruto commanding the waves, of her calming a sea king with a glance, told a different story. The woman standing before her operated on a set of rules Nami didn't understand. And how, exactly, do we find this artery? Nami challenged, her skepticism a shield. Naruto finished her coffee and handed the empty mug back to a still swooning Sanji. I'll guide you. She walked to the ship's railing and placed her hands on the wood. She closed her eyes. The crew watched, silent, as a subtle change began to occur. The Going Merry, which had been floating listlessly in the cove, began to turn. Its bow slowly, deliberately, pointing towards the open sea. It moved without a sail, without a rudder, guided by an invisible hand. A gentle but persistent current had formed around their hull. A private river in the still waters of the cove, nudging the ship forward. "Just keep the rudder straight," Naruto said, her eyes still closed. "The sea will do the rest." Nami stared, her knuckles white where she gripped her map. This was a violation of every principle she knew. It was magic, plain and simple, and Nami hated magic. Magic was a trick, a lie. But the ship was moving. And the proof was undeniable. She felt a shiver of fear, but beneath it, a spark of something else. It was the feeling a scholar might have upon discovering a new, fundamental law of the universe. It was terrifying, and it was exhilarating. With a deep breath, she made a decision. She walked to the helm. Luffy, who had been watching Naruto with stars in his eyes, snapped to attention. "Yeah, take the helm. Keep her steady. I'm going to chart this, whatever it is." She needed to document it, to try and understand it, to force this impossible phenomenon into the logical framework of her world. And so their journey began. The Going Merry slid out of the cove and into the open water. As Naruto had promised, a powerful current caught them. The ship surged forward, cutting through the waves at a speed they shouldn't have been able to manage with only their small aft sail. On either side, Nami could see the treacherous, churning waters of the Grand Line, but their path was a ribbon of smooth, purposeful movement. Naruto stood at the bow, a living compass, a living sail. Occasionally, she would call out a slight course correction. "A little to port here. Here's a seamount rising on the starboard side." Nami, perched in the crow's nest for a better vantage point, would check her charts and her log pose, her brow furrowed in concentration. The woman was never wrong. She was navigating the hidden landscape of the ocean floor as if she were walking through a familiar forest. For hours, Nami watched her, torn between her ingrained mistrust and a growing, grudging respect. She observed the way Naruto's body subtly shifted with the rhythm of the ship, the way her hair lifted in a breeze only she seemed to feel, the way her eyes, when she opened them, seemed to hold the depth of the ocean itself. She was magnificent. The thought came unbidden, and Nami shoved it away, her cheeks flushing with an unfamiliar heat. Down on the deck, the rest of the crew adapted in their own ways. Luffy was having the time of his life, treating it as the greatest amusement park ride ever. Sanji was composing a ballad in his head titled, "Ode to a Sea Goddess." Usopp was sketching Naruto, exaggerating her powers for the grand tale he was already crafting for Kaya. Only Zoro remained apart, polishing his swords, his senses on high alert, watching, waiting. As the sun reached its zenith, Nami felt a change in the current. She saw it on the water's surface a split second later, a subtle shift in the wave patterns. "Naruto, something's different." Naruto's eyes snapped open, her serene expression vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "We have company." "Company," Usopp squeaked, scrambling for his goggles. "Where? I don't see any ships." "Not on the surface," Naruto said, her voice low and dangerous. "Below, in the crushing dark of the abyssal plain, a throne of jagged obsidian and glowing anglerfish bones pulsed with a cold, malevolent light. Kale, the Abyss Emperor, watched a shimmering projection in a sphere of captured water. It showed the Going Merry, a tiny, insignificant speck, and the crimson-haired woman at its bow. "So defiant," Kale mused, his voice a sibilant whisper that echoed in the vast chamber. "Just like her mother." A massive figure knelt before the throne, his form broad and powerful, his skin the color of a deep-sea reef. He had the head of a hammerhead shark, and his eyes were cold and black. This was Triton, first commander of the Abyssal Guard, a warrior whose cruelty was legendary even among the brutal fishmen of Kale's empire. "Emperor," Triton rumbled, his voice like boulders grinding together. "The signature is confirmed. It is the Uzumaki bloodline. Allow me to take the vanguard and drag her back to you in chains. I will flay the skin from her bones for the crime of her existence." Kale raised a single, slender finger. "Patience, my commander. Ripping the flower out by the roots is unsettled. We do not know the extent of her power. She has been hidden from me for 16 years. She has had time to grow. He leaned forward, his shadowy face illuminated by the eerie light, revealing skin as pale as a corpse and eyes that held no light at all. She is traveling with pirates. Go to the nearest port of call, Whispering Shoals. Announce your presence. Make some noise. See how she reacts. I.W. And to know if she is a wild goddess of the storm, or just a frightened child playing with tides. Triton slammed a fist against his armored chest. As you command, Lord Kale. I will not fail you. I know, Kale said, a thin, cruel smile gracing his lips as he watched the sphere. You are far too afraid to. They're gaining on us, Naruto stated, her gaze fixed on the water behind them. To anyone else, the sea was an empty expanse of blue. But Naruto could feel them, the unnatural displacement of water, the sharp, aggressive pulse of dozens of bodies moving with predatory speed. Fishmen. The word hit Nami like a physical blow. Her blood ran cold. Arlong. The saw-toothed smile, the cruel laughter, the weight of his tyranny that had crushed her village and her spirit for 8 long years. Her breath hitched, and the deck suddenly felt unsteady beneath her feet. Sanji noticed her pallor immediately. Nami-san, are you all right? Nami forced herself to breathe, to push the phantom feel of Arlong's webbed hand from her memory. I'm fine, she said, her voice tighter than she intended. Naruto glanced back at her, and for a second, their eyes met. Naruto's gaze wasn't pitying. It was something else, a shared understanding. A flicker of recognition that Nami couldn't decipher but felt in her bones. They're fast, Zoro observed, his hand resting on the hilt of his Wado Ikimonji. See, and we outrun them in this magic river of yours. We won't have to, Naruto replied. She knelt, placing her palm flat against the deck of the ship. I'm not going to run. A low hum vibrated through the wood, a resonant frequency that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean. Behind them, the smooth channel of the current began to churn violently. A massive whirlpool, 100 meters across, erupted from the sea. Spinning with terrifying velocity, it was not a natural formation, it was a weapon, created in an instant, a swirling vortex of seawater and foam. The fish-man pursuers, caught completely by surprise, were sucked into the maelstrom. Their startled cries were swallowed by the roar of the water. Naruto stood up, dusting off her hands. The whirlpool raged for another minute, then, as quickly as it had formed, it subsided, the sea calming once more. That should slow them down. The crew was speechless. Usopp's jaw was on the floor. Sanji's cigarette had fallen from his lips. Zoro's grip on his sword had tightened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He had seen powerful devil fruit users, but this was different. This wasn't just controlling an element, it was a fundamental communion with it. She hadn't just attacked her pursuers, she had turned their own world against them. Nami stared at Naruto's back. The fear that had seized her a moment ago was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But now, it was mixed with a potent, undeniable sense of security. The monsters from the sea were still terrifying. But this woman ruled them. The power that Nami had, feared for so long, was now being used to protect her. The paradox was making her head spin. The rest of the journey to Whispering Shoals was tense and silent. When the archipelago finally appeared on the horizon, a collection of lush green islands surrounding a large, central port, a collective sigh of relief went through the crew. The port of Whispering Shoals was a chaotic, vibrant testament to neutrality. Pirate flags of every description flew from the masts of docked ships, right alongside the standards of merchant vessels and even a few civilian transport ships. The town itself was a sprawling collection of workshops, taverns, and markets, built around a network of canals and bridges. The air hummed with the sound of hammers on steel, the shouts of vendors, and the sea shanties of a dozen different crews. Naruto guided the Mary into a quiet canal on the edge of town. As soon as they were moored, the work began. Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji went off in search of supplies. Zoro opted to stay and guard the ship, and their powerful guest, Nami, armed with a map of the town and a significant portion of their treasury, took on the task of finding a shipwright. She asked around, from Grizz, ZLED old sailors in dockside bars to the merchants in the marketplace. Every conversation ended with the same name, Kato. He was a legend, they said. A man who could read the soul of a ship, who cool. Craft a mast from a fallen tree that would be stronger than steel. But they all followed it with the same warning: he doesn't work for pirates. Not anymore. Nami found his workshop at the highest point of the town, overlooking the sea. It was a large, sturdy building of timber and stone, the scent of sawdust and sea salt hanging heavy in the air. She knocked on the heavy oak door. After a long moment, it creaked open to reveal a man who looked as ancient and weathered as the cliffs the workshop was built on. He was old, with a face like a wrinkled sea chart and hands as gnarled as driftwood. His eyes, however, were sharp and clear. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice like the scrape of barnacles on a hull. Nami put on her most charming, business-like smile. "Kato-san, my name is Nami. I'm the navigator of a caravel. The Going Merry. We were caught in the storm of the century and our mast was destroyed. I'm told you're the only one who can fix her. We can pay, and pay well." She gestured to the heavy bag of berry at her side. Kato's eyes flickered to the bag, then back to her face, his expression unimpressed. He looked past her, his gaze falling on the Going Merry, visible even from this distance. He saw the goofy sheep figurehead, and the crude, hand-drawn Jolly Roger hanging limply from a spar. His face hardened. "Pirates," he spat, the word an insult. "I don't work for pirates. Your kind brings nothing but misery and destruction. My son." He was a shipwright, too. He thought there was romance in your lawless life. He built a ship for a crew that promised him adventure. They paid him by running him through and burning his workshop to the ground with him and his wife inside it. His voice was filled with a cold, dead grief. "Get off my property. Let your ship rot." The door slammed in Nami's face. She tried again. She pleaded. She doubled her offer. The door remained shut. Dejected, she returned to the ship to find the others had met with similar results. Fy had tried to befriend him and had been chased off by a thrown mallet. Sanji had tried to woo him with a gourmet lunch and had the food thrown back in his face. They were gathered on the deck, the mood grim, when Naruto, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Let me try." "It's no use," Nami said, sighing in frustration. "He hates pirates. He's not going to change his mind." "I'm not a pirate," Naruto said simply. She walked off the ship and headed up the path towards the old shipwright's workshop. The crew watched her go, none of them expecting a different outcome. Nami found herself holding her breath. Naruto didn't knock. She walked around to the side of the workshop, where a large set of doors stood open to the sea air, revealing a cavernous space filled with half-finished boats, stacks of lumber, and the tools of a master craftsman. Kato was there, angrily planing a piece of wood, his movements jerky with barely suppressed rage. He looked up as she entered, his eyes flashing. "Are you deaf? I said get out." Quote. Naruto didn't respond to his anger. Her gaze was fixed on a massive, half-carved block of wood in the center of the room. It was Atom wood, one of the strongest and rarest timbers in the world. From it, Kato was carving a magnificent sea dragon. The detail was exquisite, the lines filled with a powerful, dynamic life. "It's beautiful," Naruto said, her voice soft. "You're not just building things. You're giving the wood a new voice. A new soul." Kato stopped his work, stunned by her words. No one had ever described his craft that way. They spoke of durability, of speed, of craftsmanship. She spoke of its spirit. "You understand the sea," Naruto continued, walking closer. She ran a hand over the smooth, carved wood of the dragon. "You know that a ship isn't just planks and nails. It's a living thing. It has a heart. And our ship, its heart is breaking." The old man's angry facade began to crack, revealing the deep well of pain beneath. "What would you know of it?" "I know," Naruto said, her voice resonating with an ancient sadness, "what it is to lose family to senseless violence. I know what it's like to see the thing you love, the sea, used as a weapon by those filled with hate." She met his eyes, and in the impossible blue of her gaze, Kato saw a wisdom and a sorrow that defied her youthful appearance. "Our ship isn't a weapon of terror. It's a home. It carries the dreams of a future pirate king who wants to be the freest man on the seas, a swordsman who wants to be the greatest in the world, a liar who wants to be a brave warrior, a cook who wants to find the all blue, and a navigator who wants to draw a map of the entire world." She paused, her gaze flicking down towards the port, towards Nami. They are not the ones who hurt you. Don't let your pain punish the innocent. She then looked at a large stone basin in the corner of the workshop, filled with water for testing models. A long, deep crack ran down its side, causing it to leak slowly onto the floor. Naruto walked over to it. She placed her hand over the crack, not quite touching the stone. She closed her eyes. A soft blue light emanated from her palm. The water in the basin swirled, and the stone itself seemed to groan. Before Kato's astonished eyes, the edges of the crack began to fuse together, the stone flowing like clay, sealing itself until not even a seam remained. The leak stopped. She took her hand away, the light fading. Some things that are broken, she said quietly, can be made whole again. Kato stared at the basin, then at her, his mouth agape. He had lived his whole life by the sea, had heard sailors' tales of sea witches and ocean spirits, but he had always dismissed them as drunken fantasies. But this was real. This woman was not just a pirate. She was something more, something ancient. He looked from her to the Going Merry in the distance. He saw not a pirate vessel, but a wounded creature, waiting for a healer. And he looked at this strange, powerful woman who spoke of a ship's soul and could mend stone with a touch. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, releasing decades of bitterness. "All right," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion. "All right, sea witch, I'll fix your damn ship." Down on the Going Merry, Nami watched as the workshop door opened. She saw Naruto emerge, followed by the old man. Kato was nodding, pointing towards the ship, a look of grim determination on his face. She had done it. She had succeeded where all of them had failed. A slow smile spread across Nami's face, a genuine, unguarded smile of relief and admiration. And as Naruto started back down the path, she looked up, saw that smile, and returned it with a small, confident one of her own. In that moment, the wall of fear and mistrust in Nami's heart didn't crumble, but a definite crack appeared in its foundation. The moment of peace was shattered by a sudden wave of screams from the town square below. A plume of black smoke rose into the clear blue sky. A deep, guttural voice, amplified by a den mushi, boomed across the entire island, a sound that sent a jolt of pure ice through Nami's veins. "People of Whispering Shoals, a fugitive is hiding among you. A woman with hair the color of blood and power over the sea. Bring her to me, or I will tear your pathetic island apart, stone by stone." Nami's eyes darted to Naruto, who was now standing stock still on the path, her expression transformed into a mask of cold fury. On the docks below, figures were emerging from the water, dozens of them. Fishmen, armed and armored, their eyes glowing with malice. Leading them was a hulking brute with the head of a hammerhead shark, a massive trident held in his grip. Trident had arrived, and the hunt had begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Tide of Battle. The hammerhead's voice was a physical force, a shockwave of sound that rolled across Whispering Shoals, shattering windows and chilling hearts. For a frozen moment, the entire port held its breath. The clamor of the workshops, the chatter of the markets, the laughter from the taverns, it all died, snuffed out by the cold, brutal promise of violence. Then, chaos erupted. People screamed. They ran, tripping over market stalls, shoving each other in a desperate, mindless stampede to get away from the docks, away from the water. The sound was a symphony of terror, a familiar and sickening tune that made Nami's stomach clench and her limbs feel like ice. She could almost smell the salt and blood of Kokoyashi village, could almost feel the phantom weight of Arlong's shadow falling over her again. Her hand instinctively went to the pinwheel tattoo on her shoulder, a reminder of a past she could never truly escape. On the path leading from the shipwright's workshop, Naruto stood as still as the eye of a storm. The fear that paralyzed Nami and sent the town into a panic was absent from her face. In its place was a cold, quiet fury that was somehow more terrifying than Triton's booming threats. Her blue eyes, usually as bright and clear as a summer sky, had darkened to the color of a deep-sea trench. She was not the prey. The fool in the harbor just didn't know it yet. The rest of the Straw Hats reacted instantly, their disparate personalities snapping into a single, unified purpose: fight. Fishmen. Luffy cracked his knuckles, a wide, dangerous grin spreading across his face. Sounds like fun. Let's go kick his shark butt. He threatened a lady. Sanji growled, a flicker of flame spontaneously igniting on the tip of his shoe as he took a drag from his cigarette. Unforgivable. Zoro said nothing. He simply tied his black bandana around his head, the gesture as definitive as an executioner donning his hood. 3 swords were drawn with a whisper of steel, their polished surfaces reflecting the grim set of his jaw. They were all looking at Naruto, waiting for her lead. This was her fight, brought to their doorstep. But they had no intention of letting her face it alone. Nami, shaking, forced her gaze away from the chaos in the town square and looked at her crewmates. She saw no fear in them, only resolve. And then she looked at Naruto. This woman, who she had met less than a day ago, was the target. She could run. She could dive into the sea and disappear, leaving them to their fate. It was the logical, self-preserving thing to do. It was what Nami herself might have done, not so long ago. But Naruto wasn't running. She was walking, her steps deliberate and unhurried, down the path toward the town square. Toward the monster who had called her out. Something inside Nami snapped. It was the fragile cord of fear that had been wrapped around her heart for 8 years. She was not a helpless girl in Kokoyashi anymore. He was the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates. She had faced down monsters before. She would not let this new one terrorize innocent people. And she would not let this strange, powerful woman who had saved her life face it by herself. Usopp. Nami's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. Get your kabuto. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji. Don't just stand there. Let's go. She grabbed her bow staff, the Re sections clicking together with a satisfying finality. Her hands were still trembling, but her eyes were clear with a newfound fire. She ran to catch up with Naruto, falling into step beside her. Naruto glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in her deep blue eyes. She saw the fear Nami was trying so hard to master, and the fierce determination that was winning the battle. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. An alliance forged in the face of a common threat. They reached the edge of the town square together. It was a scene of devastation. Market stalls were overturned, the goods scattered across the cobblestones. The canals that crisscrossed the square were filled with Triton's shock troops, dozens of fishmen of all shapes and sizes, armed with serrated blades and cruel-looking harpoons. They moved with a chilling amphibious ease, leaping from the water to the cobblestones and back again, hurting the fleeing townsfolk, enjoying their terror. In the center of it all stood Triton. He was even larger up close, a mountain of muscle and scale. His hammerhead shark features were twisted in a sneer of arrogant cruelty. He held his massive trident loosely, its 3 prongs crackling with a faint dark energy. He saw Naruto and his sneer widened into a grin filled with needle-like teeth. There you are, little stray. The last drop of a tainted bloodline. Lord Kale sends his regards. If Kale wanted to send a message, he should have come himself. Naruto's voice was low, laced with a venom that made the air feel cold. Or is he still too much of a coward to avenue his dark hole at the bottom of the sea? Triton's grin faltered, his eyes flashing with rage at the insult to his master. Insolent whelp, you have your mother's tongue. I will enjoy cutting it out. He raised his trident. Kill her friends. Bring her to me alive. The fish men roared and surged forward. I'll take the big one, Naruto said, her eyes locked on Triton. Don't have to tell me twice. Luffy yelled, stretching his arms back. Gomu Gomu no, pistol. His fist shot across the square, slamming into the face of an octopus fish man and sending him flying back into a canal. The battle was joined. It was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Zoro became a dervish of steel, his 3 swords a blur as he engaged a half-dozen fishmen at once. Onigiri, he roared, and 3 of his opponents collapsed. Their armor and scales sliced clean through. He fought with a feral grin, a true demon in his element. Sanji was a cyclone of elegant, powerful kicks. He moved like a dancer, his black-clad legs a blur. He leapt into the air, spinning like a top. Concasse. His heel smashed into the side of a fish man's head, the sound like a coconut cracking, sending the soldier spinning into a wall. He moved with precision, intercepting any who got too close to Nami, always placing himself between her and the danger. Usopp, perched on the roof of a tavern, provided cover fire. Lead star. A pellet of lead shot from his slingshot, striking a fish man in the eye just as he was about to bring his sword down on a fleeing civilian. He wasn't a frontline combatant, but his sharpshooting was invaluable, sowing confusion and creating openings for the others. But the fish men were strong, and they were numerous. For every one they took down, 2 more seemed to crawl out of the canals. Their amphibious nature gave them a huge advantage, allowing them to strike from unexpected angles and retreat into the water where they couldn't be followed. The Straw Hats were holding their own, but they were being slowly, inexorably surrounded. Nami watched it all, her heart pounding. She fought when she had to, using her bow staff to trip, to block, to create distance. Her mind, however, was working faster than her body. She wasn't a monster of strength like her crewmates, but her battlefield was strategy. She watched the fishermen's movements, their patterns, their coordination. They weren't just a mindless mob, they were soldiers. Meanwhile, the main event was unfolding in the center of the square. Naruto and Trident circled each other, a pocket of stillness in the surrounding brawl. The dry air around them seemed to crackle with power. "You command the surface water," Trident sneered, tapping his trident on the cobblestones. "A parlor trick. Lord Kale commands the crushing, eternal dark of the abyss. You are a puddle, he is the ocean itself. The abyss is just a place for things to go when they die," Naruto retorted. "And that's where I'm going to send you." She made the first move. With a flick of her wrist, the water in the nearest canal rose up, forming a trio of writhing, liquid tentacles. They lashed out at Trident like whips, moving faster than the eye could follow. Trident just laughed. He spun his trident, a vortex of dark energy deflecting the water whips, causing them to explode into harmless spray. He charged forward, his immense bulk covering the distance in a heartbeat. He thrust his trident, aiming to impale her. Naruto didn't dodge. She stomped her foot on the ground. The cobblestones beneath Trident's feet suddenly erupted as a geyser of high-pressure water shot up from the sewer system below, blasting him off his feet and sending him hurtling backward. He landed with a crash, recovering instantly. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "Impressive. You were your mother's daughter. She was also a fool who thought she could defy her destiny." He slammed the butt of his trident on the ground. A dark pulse of energy spread out, and the water in the canals began to bubble and turn black. "Let me show you a taste of the Abyss Emperor's power." The corrupted water rose, but it did not form whips or tentacles. It formed crude, hulking soldiers of black water. Their forms vaguely humanoid, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Naruto's eyes widened slightly. He couldn't create life, but he was animating the water with Kale's energy, corrupting it, turning her own element against her. It was a perversion. The water soldiers lumbered forward, joining the fight against the Straw Hats, their bludgeoning fists adding to the chaos. Naruto countered, creating her own soldiers of pure, clear water, and the square became a battlefield for 2 opposing elemental armies. It was then that Nami saw it. Trident was powerful, but he wasn't a natural commander. Every time he gave a major order or used his trident to create more water soldiers, he would glance toward a specific bell tower on the edge of the square. A second later, the fish men would execute a complex flanking maneuver. It wasn't him giving the orders. Someone else was coordinating the attack. "Naruto!" Nami screamed, her voice cutting through the din of battle. "The bell tower. He's got a spotter." Quote. Naruto's head snapped up. She saw the glint of a spyglass in the tower's belfry. Without hesitation, she thrust her palm forward. A spear of water, compressed until it was as hard as diamond, shot across the square and slammed into the bell tower. The entire structure exploded in a shower of stone and splintered wood. The fish men's coordinated assault immediately fell into disarray. They were back to being a strong but disorganized mob. Trident roared in fury, realizing his tactical advantage was gone. "You meddling little wench," he bellowed, his eyes locking on Nami. He moved with blinding speed, not towards Naruto, but towards Nami. Sanji and Zoro were too far away, tied down by their own fights. Luffy's arm was stretched out, wrapped around AP Alar as he fought a group on the other side of the square. Nami's blood ran cold. He was going to kill her. Time seemed to slow down. She could see the individual muscles in his arm tense as he raised his trident. But in that instant, a wall of crimson and blue shot past her. Naruto moved faster than she had ever moved before, a blur of motion that left a trail of saltwater spray in the air. She intercepted Triton's charge, her hands glowing with a fierce azure light. She didn't meet his trident with a water construct. She met it with her bare hands. There was a deafening boom as her glowing palms caught the 3 prongs of the trident, inches from her face. A shockwave of energy erupted from the point of impact, cracking the cobblestones in a perfect circle around them. Naruko's feet slid back, carving grooves in the stone. But she held her ground. Her expression was one of pure, undiluted fury. "You," she snarled, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "Don't touch her." With a scream that was more primal than human, she pushed. A massive wave of pure hydrokinetic force exploded from her body. It wasn't just water. It was pressure, it was momentum, it was the raw, untamed power of the ocean unleashed. Triton's eyes widened in disbelief as he was lifted off his feet and sent flying, not just back, but up, tumbling end over end through the air. He crashed through the roof of the Harbormaster's office and disappeared from sight. Naruko stood there, breathing heavily, her hands still glowing, her knuckles white. She looked at Nami, her chest heaving. "Are you okay?" Nami could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She was staring at Naruko, at the woman who had just put her body on the line, who had unleashed a godlike power, all to protect her. The last remnants of Nami's fear and suspicion didn't just crack. They vaporized. In their place, something warm and powerful and utterly terrifying began to bloom in her chest. With Triton gone, the remaining fishmen lost their nerve. They broke ranks, diving into the canals and swimming for the open sea as fast as they could. The battle was over. The square was a ruin. The straw hats were battered and bruised, but they were victorious. The townspeople slowly began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of terror, relief, and awe as they stared at the woman with the crimson hair standing in the center of the destruction. Naruko's glow faded, and the sheer exhaustion of her last attack hit her. She staggered, a wave of dizziness washing over her. Before she could fall, a steadying hand was on her arm. She looked up to see Nami. Her brown eyes filled with a complex storm of emotions Naruko couldn't begin to decipher. "You were incredible," Nami whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. From the hill overlooking the port, Kato the shipwright stood outside his workshop, a smoking pipe in his hand. He had watched the entire battle unfold. He had seen the pirates fight to protect his town. He had seen the sea witch unleash her terrifying power not for conquest, but for defense. He took a long draw from his pipe and looked at the wounded going merry, then back at the group of misfits in the square below. "A pirate who wants to be king," he murmured to himself, a slow, grudging smile spreading across his weathered face. "A sea witch with the soul of a guardian. Well, I'll be damned." He turned and walked back into his workshop, grabbing a set of well-worn tools. He had a ship to save. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers on the Water. The silence that fell over the town square was heavier than the battle that had preceded it. It was a silence filled with the scent of ozone and saltwater, the sight of shattered cobblestones and splintered wood, and the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. The townsfolk, emerging from their hiding places, didn't cheer. They stared, their expressions a confused, fearful mosaic. They looked at the battered straw hats, at the ruin of their marketplace, and most of all, at the woman with the crimson hair who stood at the epicenter of it all. Naruko swayed, the adrenaline that had fueled her godlike display of power draining away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its wake. Nami's grip on her arm tightened, a warm, solid anchor in a world that was suddenly tilting on its axis. "Easy," Nami murmured, her voice close to Naruko's ear. "I've got you." The gratitude Naruko felt was a foreign sensation, a warmth that spread through her chest and eased some of the cold exhaustion. For her entire life, she had been the rock, the unshakable force. To lean on someone else, even for a moment, was a dizzying, frightening, yet not entirely unpleasant feeling. Luffy, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, let out a loud, hearty laugh. "Shishishi. We kicked their butts. Now, where's the meat? I'm starving." His simple, honest declaration broke the spell. A few of the braver merchants began to edge forward, not with thanks, but with anger. "Look at this. My stall is ruined," one shouted, pointing a trembling finger at a pile of splintered wood and crushed fruit. "Who's going to pay for this?" another demanded, gesturing at the gaping hole in the harbormaster's office where Triton had made his unceremonious exit. A portly man in the uniform of the local constabulary, who had been conspicuously absent during the fighting, now bustled forward. His face red with self-importance. "You, pirates, and you," he pointed a quivering finger at Naruto. "You are all under arrest for destruction of property, disturbing the peace, and unauthorized use of ocean-based weaponry." Zoro took a menacing step forward, his hand resting on his swords. "Are you sure you want to finish that sentence?" The constable paled, but before the situation could escalate, a deep, gravelly voice cut through the air like a saw through old wood. "That's enough." Kato, the shipwright, strode into the square, his weathered face set in a stony mask. He walked past the constable without a glance and stopped in front of the assembled pirates. He looked them over, his sharp eyes taking in their cuts and bruises, the fierce loyalty in the way they stood together, and the exhaustion that Naruto was trying so hard to hide. "You fought for this town when its own protectors were hiding under their desks," Kato said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He shot a withering glare at the constable, who flinched. "The damage can be repaired. A town can be rebuilt. Lives cannot be replaced." He then turned his gaze fully on Naruto. "As for the sea witch, she saved us all." He didn't say it with reverence or awe. He said it like a simple statement of fact, a truth as solid and undeniable as the atom wood in his workshop. His words, coming from a man so respected and so famously anti-pirate, silenced the crowd. The anger and fear began to be replaced by a grudging sense of shame. Kato turned his back on the town and addressed the straw hats. "Your ship, the Going Merry, her spine is broken, but her heart is strong. I'll fix her." Usopp's jaw dropped. Luffy's eyes turned into stars. Nami just stared, astonished at the complete 180 from the cantankerous old man. "But," Kato added, holding up a gnarled finger, "it won't be easy. And it won't be cheap." He looked from Usopp, the crew's unofficial shipwright, to Nami, the treasurer. "I have the wood, the last piece of the treasure tree atom on this archipelago, big enough and strong enough to serve as a mainmast for a ship crazy enough to sail the Grand Line. But I'll need help, and I'll need you to prove you're worthy of it." He grunted, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching his lips. "Consider it your payment for the mess you made. Now, get her back to your ship. She looks like she's about to fall over." He was looking at Naruto. Nami didn't need to be told twice. With a supportive arm around Naruto's waist, she guided her away from the square, the rest of the crew following, leaving Kato to deal with the stunned constable and the murmuring crowd. The walk back to the Merry was a blur for Naruto. The world seemed muted, the sounds distant. The only thing that felt real was the warmth of Nami's body next to hers, the steady pressure of her hand on her back. When they reached the ship, Sanji immediately disappeared into the galley, airman to cook a restorative meal fit for a goddess. Zoro took up a watch position in the crow's nest, his keen eye scanning the horizon for any new threats. Luffy and Usopp immediately started clearing the deck in preparation for Kato's arrival. Nami led Naruto into the women's quarters, a small, cozy room she and, until recently, Vivi had shared. It was meticulously neat, a stark contrast to the chaotic boys' cabin. Charts and maps were neatly rolled and stored, and the air smelled faintly of tangerines and old paper. "Sit," Nami said, her voice softer now that they were alone. She pushed Naruto gently onto the edge of her bunk. She bustled around the small space, grabbing a medical kit, a basin of fresh water, and a clean cloth. Naruto watched her, a strange feeling fluttering in her chest. She wasn't used to being cared for. She was the one who calmed the storms, the one who faced the monsters. This quiet, gentle concern was a language she didn't fully understand, but was beginning to appreciate. Nami knelt in front of her, dipping the cloth in the cool water. She gently began to dab at a cut on Naruto's cheek, her touch surprisingly delicate. Their faces were inches apart. Naruto could see the flecks of gold in Nami's brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of tangerine that clung to her. The navigator's brow was furrowed in concentration, a small line appearing between her eyebrows that Naruto, for some inexplicable reason, found utterly captivating. "Who is he?" Nami asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Kale. Triton mentioned him. He called you the last of a bloodline." Naruko's jaw tightened. The name was like a shard of ice in the warm, quiet room. He calls himself the Abyss Emperor, she said, her voice flat. He rules a kingdom of fanatics and monsters in the deep places of the world. And he murdered my family. She didn't elaborate. She didn't speak of the Uzumaki clan, a lineage blessed and cursed with a unique connection to the sea. She didn't speak of the ambush, the slaughter. The memory of her mother forcing her into an escape pod and sending her to the surface world as their underwater citadel was torn apart. The words were stones in her throat. Nami saw the flicker of immense pain in her eyes, the shadow that briefly eclipsed their brilliant blue. She didn't press. She knew what it was to have a past so painful you couldn't speak its name. She had lived it. Instead, she simply finished cleaning the cut, her touch lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Well, Nami said, her voice regaining some of its usual steel. He sent his goon to the wrong island. We don't let people get pushed around. The "we" hung in the air between them. It was an inclusion, an acceptance. Naruko felt that strange warmth in her chest again, stronger this time. Before she could find the words to respond, Sanji entered with a tray laden with food, a nutrient-rich soup, grilled sea bass, and a glass of fresh juice. His chivalrous demeanor was back, but beneath it was a genuine concern that Naruko was beginning to recognize as a hallmark of this strange, chaotic crew. She ate, and with each bite, she could feel her unique fizz. Iology drawing strength from the food and the surrounding water, the deep well of her energy slowly beginning to refill. In the crushing, silent dark of his throne room, Kale watched Triton's failure in the shimmering water sphere. He was not angry. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. Kale was cold. He was the pressure of the abyss, the patient, inexorable force that grinds mountains to dust. Triton, his armor cracked and his body a canvas of bruises, knelt before the throne, his massive form trembling. My emperor. I underestimated her. Her power it is like the legends of the first queen. It is, Kale said, his voice a calm, chilling whisper, and you were a hammer sent to perform surgery. A task for which you were ill-suited. He gestured languidly with one hand. From the shadows, two shadowy figures emerged. They were not fishmen. They were sleek, silent killers, their bodies covered in the skin of chameleonic deep-sea squid, allowing them to blend into the darkness. Your failure has, however, provided useful information, Kale continued, his eyes never leaving the sphere, which now showed Naruko resting in the cabin of the Going Merry. She is powerful, yes. But she is not invincible. She tires. And more importantly, his lips curved into a cruel smile. She forms attachments. He looked at Triton, and for the first time, the commander saw a flicker of something truly terrifying in his master's dead eyes. You will be reassigned, Commander, to the brine pits. You will oversee the re-education of our new recruits. A task I'm sure you will find humbling. Triton's blood ran cold. The brine pits were a place of torment, a living hell where Kale's will was beaten into those who resisted him. It was a fate worse than death. My lord, please. But Kale was no longer paying attention to him. The two assassins dragged the now sobbing commander away. Kale turned his attention to a third figure, one who had been standing in the shadows the entire time. This one was slender, humanoid, with skin that seemed to shift and shimmer like an oil slick on water. Its features were vague, indistinct, as if its very identity was in flux. Mizu, Kale said. My emperor, the figure replied. Its voice a disconcerting harmony of male and female tones. The girl has a weakness. The navigator, the one with the orange hair, Kale stated. She defended her with a surprising ferocity. An emotional response. A vulnerability. I see it, my lord, Mizu whispered. I do not want the girl broken. Not yet. I want her brought to me. I want to see if her mother's will still resides within her. But her protectors, they are an inconvenience. Go to Whispering Shoals. Do not engage them in battle. That is a tool for the clumsy. I want you to fracture them. Turn them against each other. A ship with a divided crew is already sunk. And if you get the chance, Kale's eyes glinted. Show the little sea witch what happens to the things she dares to care about. It will be done, Lord Kale, Mizu hissed. Before melting back into the shadows, leaving nothing but a faint ripple in the oppressive darkness. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the port. The deck of the Going Merry was a hive of activity. Kato had arrived with a team of his best apprentices, and under his gruff direction, the process of repairing the ship had begun. He and Usopp were huddled over a set of blueprints, arguing and collaborating in a language of measurements and wood grains that only they seemed to understand. Despite Kato's stern demeanor, Nami could see the spark of respect in his eyes as he listened to Usopp's surprisingly innovative ideas. The rest of the crew worked, clearing debris, splicing new ropes, patching the railings. The ship felt alive again, not just a vessel, but a patient undergoing a healing surgery. Naruto, feeling her strength almost fully returned, came out on deck. The air was cool, and the setting sun painted the sky in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and purple. She saw Nami standing alone at the stern, leaning on the railing, watching the sunset. Naruto walked over and stood beside her. For a long moment, they were silent, simply sharing the view. The chaos of the day seemed to wash away in the calm, quiet beauty of the evening. "Thank you," Naruto said, her voice soft. Before, in the cabin, Nami turned to look at her, a small smile playing on her lips. The fading light caught in her orange hair, making it glow like a halo. "We're a crew. We look after each other. Even the weird, mysterious sea witches who fall out of the sky." Naruto chuckled, a real, genuine sound. "Is that what I am?" "For now," Nami teased, her smile widening. "You've got a lot of secrets, Naruto Uzumaki. But I'm glad you're here." The admission was quiet, but it was filled with a sincerity that made Naruto's heart beat a little faster. She looked from Nami's smiling face to the vast, endless sea. For so long, the ocean had been her only companion, her confidant, her shield. It was a lonely existence. But now, standing on the deck of this strange little ship, surrounded by these insane, loyal pirates, and next to this brilliant, fiery navigator, she didn't feel lonely at all. "Me too, Nami," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. "Me too." She had faced down a monster and revealed her power to the world. She had made a powerful enemy and forged an unlikely new alliance. But as she stood there, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear below the horizon, she knew the most dangerous and exciting part of her journey was just beginning. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. An Echo in the Dark. The dawn that followed the battle was crisp and bright, a clean slate. The air on the deck of the Going Merry hummed with a different kind of energy, not the frantic tension of a fight, but the focused thrum of creation. Kato and his team had worked through the night, their lanterns casting dancing shadows as they performed intricate surgery on the wounded ship. Now, in the morning light, the fruit of their labor was ready. A magnificent new mast, carved from a single, colossal piece of atom wood, lay beside the ship. Its surface was the color of rich honey, and it seemed to hum with a latent strength that made the old, splintered mast look like a twig. Naruto stood by the railing, a mug of Sanji's coffee warming her hands. She had slept deeply, a dreamless, healing slumber, and felt the familiar, powerful thrum of the ocean's energy coursing through her veins once more. She watched as Kato directed a complex system of ropes and pulleys, preparing to hoist the new mast into place. "It's incredible," a voice said beside her. Nami had approached so quietly Naruto hadn't noticed. Her focus lost in the rhythm of the work. The navigator held a steaming mug of her own, a blend of tea and tangerine juice that was her morning ritual. She wasn't looking at the mast, but at Naruto. "What you did yesterday. I've never seen anything like it." The compliment was straightforward, delivered in Nami's no-nonsense tone, yet it made a pleasant warmth bloom in Naruto's chest. "The sea is a powerful ally," she deflected, taking a sip of coffee. "It wasn't the sea," Nami countered, turning to lean against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "It was you. You stood between that monster and me. You didn't even hesitate." Her brown eyes were serious, searching. Why? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Why had she reacted with such overwhelming, primal force? It wasn't just about protecting an innocent person. It was about protecting Nami. The thought was a dangerous, uncharted current, and Naruto wasn't yet ready to navigate it. "He was going to hurt you," Naruto said simply, as if it were the most obvious reason in the world. I don't let people I don't let my friends get hurt. The word, friends, felt both monumental and inadequate. Nami's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. Well, in that case, welcome to the crew. She gently bumped Naruko's shoulder with her own. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a port in a storm. A quiet acceptance that settled deep in Naruko's soul. This fragile peace, however, was not destined to last. As the day wore on, a subtle poison began to seep into the air of Whispering Shoals. A poison carried on the whispers of the townsfolk. It started in the marketplace. Mizu, wearing the face of a kindly old fisherman mending his nets, spoke to a group of merchants. A miracle they saved us, Strange, though, those fishmen only showed up after that red-haired woman arrived. Almost like she brought the storm with her. It continued in the taverns. Mizu, now, a boisterous sailor with a tankard of ale, clapped a man on the back. Did you see the way that swordsman was smiling? And the cook with the flaming feet? They're not heroes, they're monsters who enjoy a good brawl. Our town was just their playground. The whispers spread like a virus, twisting the previous day's gratitude into suspicion, then fear, then outright hostility. When Sanji went to the market for ingredients, the vendors who had been friendly the day before now refused to sell to him, muttering about pirates bringing trouble. A group of children who had been watching Usopp in awe now threw stones at him, calling him a liar and a monster. The mood on the ship soured with the towns. The crew, accustomed to being outcasts but not to this kind of insidious, personal rejection, grew tense. Zoro's natural suspicion, which had been momentarily quieted, returned with a vengeance. He found a piece of paper slipped under the door of the men's quarters, a crudely forged marine intelligence report. It was Mizu's work, describing a mysterious woman with hydrokinetic powers known only as the Crimson Tide, wanted for questioning in connection with the destruction of 3 naval bases. It was a lie, but it was a believable one. He confronted Naruko on the deck, away from the others, his hand resting casually on his swords. The townspeople are scared of you. Maybe they have a reason to be. What aren't you telling us? Naruko recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about? I'm talking about your power, he said, his voice a low growl. You command the sea. You topple buildings. That's not normal, even for the Grand Line. What happens when you lose your temper with us? Are you going to sink the ship? Before Naruko could respond, Nami stormed over, her face thunderous. What is wrong with you, Zoro? She saved our lives. She saved my life, and I'm grateful for that, Zoro shot back, his glare shifting to Nami. But that doesn't mean I trust her. We know nothing about her, except that an army of fishmen is hunting her down. She's trouble, and you're letting your gratitude blind you to the danger. The accusation, heavy with unspoken meaning, hung between them. The friendship Nami had with Zoro was one of the oldest on the crew, built on a foundation of mutual respect. To have him question her judgment so bluntly, so cruelly, stung. The only danger I see, Nami said, her voice dangerously quiet, is a paranoid swordsman who's forgotten what it means to be a part of this crew. She turned and walked away, leaving Zoro standing there, his anger warring with a flicker of doubt. The seed of mistrust had been planted. The tension was a thick, suffocating blanket over the ship. Sanji and Zoro got into a vicious argument that escalated into a full-blown kicking and sword-clanging fight over a perceived slight. Usopp, rattled by the children's rejection, became quiet and withdrawn. Luffy, while immune to the psychological games, could feel the discord. The usual chaotic, joyful energy of his ship was gone, replaced by a sullen, angry silence. This isn't fun anymore, he declared, pouting on the sheep's head figurehead. Naruko felt like the source of the infection. Every hostile glare from a townsperson, every tense conversation on the ship, was a weight on her shoulders. She retreated into herself, standing at the bow for hours, staring out at the open sea. The one place where she still felt a sense of belonging. The thought of leaving, of disappearing back into the waves to draw the trouble away from them, was a constant, painful temptation. It was in this atmosphere of simmering resentment that Kato delivered the final piece of news. The mast was set, a perfect, powerful spine for the Going Merry. But there was a problem. The stow. RM's pressure changes cracked some of the keel supports, he announced, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He had a new apprentice with him, a quiet, slender youth with shifty eyes who know 1 hectare. Seen before, Mizu in its latest disguise. The mast is strong, but the foundation is weak. It needs to be reinforced with a special resin. A waterproof sealant made from the sap of the iron coral. Iron coral? Nami asked, pulling out a local chart. I've never heard of it. It's rare, the new apprentice said, its voice a nondescript tenor. Only grows in one place. The echoing caves, on the far side of the island. The currents are too treacherous for a large ship to get close. Kato nodded in agreement. He's right. You'll need a small boat. And a navigator who can read the coastal eddies. All eyes turned to Nami. Naruto saw her chance. A way to be useful. A way to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the ship, even for a few hours. I'll go with you, she said, her voice firm. I can handle the currents. We'll be faster with the two of us. Nami hesitated for only a second. The thought of getting away from the bickering, of being with the one person on the island who didn't seem to be looking at her with suspicion, was an irresistible pull. All right, let's go. Zoro watched them go, his arms crossed, his single eye narrowed. Letting the two of them go off alone. It's a mistake. But no one was listening. The small skiff cut through the water, propelled by gentle but insistent currents that answered Naruto's silent call. She sat at the tiller, guiding the boat through a maze of jagged rocks and hidden reefs with an effortless grace that Nami couldn't help but admire. The tension of the ship slowly melted away under the warm sun and the clean, salt-scented air. I'm sorry about Zoro, Nami said, breaking the comfortable silence. He's protective and stupid. Naruto managed a small smile. He's a swordsman. He sees everything as a potential threat to be analyzed and cut down. I understand. You shouldn't have to, Nami said, a fierce look in her eyes. After everything you've done. They navigated into the mouth of a large sea cave. The entrance was a dark, gaping maw in the cliff face. The sound of the waves inside creating a low, mournful echo that gave the caves their name. As they moved deeper, the sunlight faded, replaced by the eerie, beautiful glow of phosphorescent moss clinging to the cavern walls. The main cavern was a breathtaking natural cathedral. The water was a placid, glowing turquoise, and strange rock formations rose like silent sentinels. It was beautiful, but it was also unnervingly quiet. I don't see any coral, Nami said, her voice hushed, her navigator's instincts telling her something was wrong. The air was too still. That's because there isn't any, a familiar voice said. Nami and Naruto spun around. Standing on a ledge near the cave entrance, bathed in the ethereal blue light, was Nami. A perfect duplicate. From her orange hair to the determined set of her jaw. She was smiling, but it was a cold, cruel mockery of Nami's real smile. The real Nami, still in the boat, gasped. What is this? Before Naruto could react, the water around the skiff turned black and viscous. Corrupted tendrils shot up, wrapping around Nami, pulling her from the boat and trapping her in a cage of dark, solidified water. Nami, Naruto cried out, moving to help her. But the clone on the ledge laughed, a sound that was a twisted echo of Nami's own. Don't worry about her, the clone sneered, its voice a perfect imitation. It hopped down from the ledge, landing silently on the water's surface, which seemed to harden beneath its feet. You're the one I'm here for. The clone began to walk towards Naruto, its face a mask of contempt. You really thought we'd welcome you? A monster. You bring nothing but destruction. You draw killers and fanatics to our doorstep. Everything you touch turns to ash. The words were poisoned darts, aimed at the deepest, most secret fears in Naruto's heart. Stop it, Naruto said, her voice trembling slightly. You think I don't see the way you look at me? The clone continued, its voice dripping with venom. You think you can replace my real family? My real friends? You're just a stray, a curse. You'll get us all killed, just like you got your own family killed. That last barb hit its mark. Naruto staggered back as if she'd been physically struck, the memory of her mother's dying eyes flashing behind her own. She was paralyzed, not by a physical force, but by a psychological one. This creature was speaking her own worst nightmares aloud. The real Nami, struggling in her watery prison, watched in horror. She saw the pain and confusion on Naruto's face. This wasn't a fight of fists, it was an execution of the spirit. Naruko, don't listen to it. It's not me, she screamed, but her voice was muffled by the dark water. Seeing Naruko falter, the Nami clone smiled triumphantly and lunged, its hands forming into sharpened claws of black water. But in that moment, Nami's desperation gave her an idea. Naruko, she yelled, her voice raw. That coffee this morning, it was terrible. Sanji-kun must have used salt instead of sugar. The clone paused, its attack hesitating for a fraction of a second. Its brow furrowed in confusion. Naruko's head snapped up. It was a stupid, trivial detail. But it was their detail. They had joked about it at the railing, Nami teasing that Sanji must have been distracted by Naruko's beauty to make such a mistake. A small, shared moment that a perfect copy could never know. The spell was broken. The pain in Naruko's eyes was replaced by a glacier of cold, hard rage. The hesitation vanished. This thing had dared to wear Nami's face, to use her voice to spew such filth. It was unforgivable. You, Naruko hissed, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, are going to regret that. She didn't create a tidal wave or a water dragon. Her response was one of pure, focused precision. She raised her hand, and the glowing turquoise water of the cavern rose with it. It compressed, not into a spear, but into 100 tiny, impossibly sharp needles of pure, solidified water. With a flick of her wrist, she sent them flying. The clone's eyes widened in panic. It tried to defend itself, but the needles were too fast, too numerous. They didn't pierce its skin. They struck its pressure points, its joints, its nerve clusters. The creature let out a shriek that was a discordant mix of voices as its body locked up, paralyzed. It collapsed onto the water's surface, its stolen form melting away like wax, revealing a shimmering, vaguely humanoid figure of oily, shifting darkness. The bond, as fascinating, Mizu hissed, its true voice a chorus of whispers. Lord Kale will be so pleased. With a final, gurgling laugh, it dissolved, melting into the water and seeping into the cracks of the cave floor, gone as if it had never been there. The dark water cage around Nami dissipated. Naruko was at her side in an instant, her arms supporting her as she coughed and sputtered. Are you okay? Naruko asked, her voice tight with concern. Nami nodded, shivering. She looked at the spot where Mizu had disappeared, then back at Naruko. The attack hadn't been on their lives, but on their trust. On their very bond. It had been a calculated, insidio. A assault designed to break them from the inside. And it had almost worked. They were alone in the silent, glowing cave. The immediate threat was gone. But a new, terrifying reality had set in. Their enemy was not just a monster with a trident. It was a shadow that could wear the faces of those they loved. And it knew exactly where to strike to make them bleed. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Weight of the Crown. The journey back from the echoing caves was a study in silence. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in bleeding shades of orange and violet, but neither of them noticed. Naruko guided the skiff with an automaton's precision, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her knuckles white where she gripped the tiller. Nami sat huddled in the bow, her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering despite the warm evening air. The eerie, multi-toned laughter of Mizu still echoed in her ears. It wasn't the cage of dark water that had shaken her. It was the violation. Seeing her own face contorted with such malice. Hearing her own voice weaponized to deliver such cruel, targeted poison, it felt like a deeper wound than any blade could inflict. She kept glancing at Naruko, at the rigid set of her shoulders. The storm clouds swirling in her blue eyes. The words Mizu had spoken, the barbs about Naruko's past, had struck a nerve so deep that the tremors were still visible. When the familiar, goofy sheep's head of the Going Merry came into view, the tension in the skiff became an almost physical presence. The ship, once a symbol of refuge, now felt like a stage for the next act of this insidious play. As they glided into the canal, Zoro was the first to see them. He was in the crow's nest, polishing his shisui, but his single eye missed nothing. He saw the grim, haunted express signs on their faces and his hand paused. The smug satisfaction of being proven right, that letting them go alone was a mistake, died before it could fully form. This was not the aftermath of a simple skirmish. This was the pall of something far worse. By the time they climbed aboard, the rest of the crew had gathered, drawn by the heavy silence that surrounded the two women. The mast was in place, a towering monument of golden wood that made the Mary look stronger and prouder than ever before. But the victory felt hollow. So, Zoro asked from above, his voice flat. Did you get what you needed? Nami looked up, her expression hard. There was no resin. There is no such thing as iron coral. It was a trap. A collective intake of breath went through the crew. Sanji's cigarette fell from his lips. What happened? Luffy asked, his usual cheerful tone replaced by rare seriousness. Did you fight somebody? We didn't fight. Naruko's voice was quiet, but it cut through the evening air. The chilling finality of an executioner's blade. We were dissected. She walked to the center of the deck, forcing herself to meet the eyes of each crew member. She saw their confusion, their concern, and in Zoro's case, his wary, analytical gaze. The temptation to stay silent, to bear this burden alone, was immense. But Mizu's attack had proven the folly of that path. Her secrets were no longer just her own. They were a loaded gun pointed at the heart of this crew. The one who attacked us, it could change its shape. It wore Nami's face, Naruko explained, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. It didn't try to kill us. It tried to break us. It used our own insecurities, our own fears, against us. Her gaze flickered to Zoro. It's why the town turned on us. It's been here the whole time, whispering in ears, planting seeds of doubt, turning allies into enemies without throwing a single punch. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Sanji's face Kanto, RTED in rage at the thought of someone so vilely using Nami's image. Usopp shivered, realizing the taunts of the children had likely been orchestrated. Zoro's expression was unreadable, but the subtle tightening of his grip on his swords betrayed a deep, simmering fury. He had been a puppet in the enemy's show, his own suspicion used as a tool to help isolate Naruko. The realization was a profound insult to his pride. This creature works for the one who sent Triton, Naruko continued, the words coming faster now, a confession long held back. His name is Kale. He calls himself the Abyss Emperor. She took a deep breath. The next words heavier than any tidal wave she had ever summoned. He isn't hunting me because I'm a threat. He's hunting me because of what I am. What I represent. She looked out at the sea. At the darkening water that had been her cradle and her curse. My family name is Uzumaki. We weren't just a clan. We were royalty. Rulers of a kingdom hidden in the deep sea, a place of light and life carved out of the crushing dark. For generations, my line has had a unique connection to the water, a bond that allowed us to be its guardians, to maintain a balance between the surface world and the depths. Nami listened, her heart aching for the lonely girl who stood before them, finally letting down her walls. This wasn't just a story, it was a testament of survival. My mother was the queen. Naruko's voice cracked for the first time, a hairline fracture in her composure. Kale was one of her court, a scholar obsessed with the abyss, with the idea that true power didn't come from balance, but from absolute domination. He believed the ocean's true nature was cold, dark, and predatory. He learned to corrupt the water, to twist it into something dead and subservient. He staged a coup. He murdered them all. Her voice dropped to a whisper. My mother died getting me to the surface. I am the last one. I am the runaway princess, the last echo of a drowned kingdom. She finally looked at them, her brilliant blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. This is the weight I carry. This is the fight I have inherited. Kale won't stop until he has eradicated the last remnant of my family and claimed total dominion over the seas. You saved my life, and in return, I have painted a target on all of your backs. She straightened up, her expression one of profound, painful resolve. This is my war, not yours. You didn't sign up to fight an emperor of the abyss. I will not let you become casualties of my past. She took a step towards the railing. I will leave, tonight. I can draw him, and his shape-shifting assassin, away from you. It's the only way to keep you safe. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. Then, Nami laughed. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was a sharp, incredulous, angry bark. Are you an idiot? She snapped, stepping forward until she was right in front of Naruko. Did you listen to a single word I said in that cave? We're a crew. You're one of us now. You're crazy, fish-faced. Stalker Emperor is our problem now. That's how this works. End of story. Her fierce loyalty was a shield, deflecting Naruko's attempt at self-sacrifice. Nami's swan is absolutely correct, Sanji declared, lighting a new cigarette with a flourish. To abandon a beautiful princess beset by such foul villains would be a stain upon the honor of any man of the sea. My flames are at your service. HMPH. An emperor, huh? Usopp trembled, but he stood his ground, striking a dramatic pose. Quote, he has clearly never heard of the legendary Captain Usopp. He and his army of 8,000 warriors will gladly assist you in dethroning this watery tyrant. Zoro slowly, deliberately, sheathed his swords. The sharp, metallic click was a sound of finality. He walked over to Naruko, his expression still grim, but the hostile suspicion was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. You're a bigger pain in the ass than I thought, he grunted. And your enemies are ridiculously annoying. But, he met her gaze, his single eye unwavering. Luffy decided you were his friend. That makes you our Nakama. We don't abandon Nakama. It was the closest he could get to an apology, and it was more than enough. All eyes turned to their captain. Luffy had been quiet throughout Naruko's confession, his straw hat shadowing his face. Now, he walked forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. He reached up, took his treasured hat from his own head, and gently placed it on top of Naruko's crimson hair. Naruko gasped, her hand flying up to touch the worn straw. The weight of it was immense, a sacred trust, a symbol of a promise that she knew was the core of this man's entire being. You're not a princess, Luffy said, a slow grin finally spreading across his face, chasing the shadows away. Not anymore. You're Naruko. You're the sea controller on my ship. And I'm going to be king of the pirates. He puffed out his chest. So there's no way some stupid, gloomy abyss emperor is stronger than us. It's impossible. Shishishi. His infectious laughter broke the last of the tension. The crew was whole again. Not just whole, but stronger. Tempered. Mizu's venom had failed. The enemy had tried to isolate Naruko, to make her a source of fear and mistrust. Instead, they had forced her to reveal her heart, and in doing so, had cemented her place in the strange, unbreakable family that was the Straw Hat crew. Later that night, the work on the Mary was complete. A celebratory feast was in full swing on the deck. Luffy's laughter and Sanji's joyous shouts echoing across the water. But Naruko wasn't there. She was at the stern, holding the straw hat in her hands, tracing the brim as she stared at the reflection of the moon on the water. He doesn't just give that to anyone, you know. Nami's voice was soft as she came to stand beside her. She leaned on the railing, her gaze following Naruko's out to sea. It's heavy, Naruko whispered, looking at the hat with a reverence that bordered on awe. That's because it's full of dreams, Nami replied. She held out her hand. Here. Naruko gently placed the hat in her hand, and Nami returned it to its rightful place on the hook inside the galley door. When she came back, she didn't speak, simply stood beside Naruko, sharing the quiet. In the cave, Nami said finally, her voice low. I wasn't scared of the water cage. I wasn't even that scared of the other me. I was scared when I saw your face. When it said those things to you. The look in your eyes, I thought it had broken you. She turned, her brown eyes luminous in the moonlight. I don't think I could have stood that. The confession was raw, vulnerable, and it struck a chord deep inside Naruko. I was scared too, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Not of Mizu, not even of Kale. For the first time in my life, I have something I don't want to lose. A home. And I was terrified, that my past was going to take it away from me. Nami's hand found hers, her fingers lacing through Naruko's. Her skin was warm, a stark contrast to the cool night air. The simple touch was an anchor, a promise. We won't let him win, Nami said, her voice filled with a conviction as solid as the new mast that towered over them. He wanted to divide us. But all he did was show us how strong we are together. Naruko looked at their joined hands, then into Nami's determined eyes. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. But for the first time, it was outweighed by something else. Hope, and a burgeoning warmth that felt brighter and more powerful than any star in the night sky. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Fog. The Going Merry felt like a new ship. More than that, it felt like a ship that had been to war, earned its scars, and been reborn stronger. The atom wood mast stood tall and proud against the brilliant morning sky, its golden grain seeming to drink in the sunlight. It was a symbol of their victory, of their resilience. As the Straw Hats made their final preparations to depart Whispering Shoals, the atmosphere was charged with a renewed sense of purpose. The enemy had shown its face, and they had met the challenge not by fracturing, but by forging their bonds into something as unbreakable as the new mast itself. Kato stood on the dock, his arms crossed, a plume of smoke curling up from the pipe clenched between his teeth. He watched Usopp and Luffy perform a final check on the rigging, his weathered face an unreadable mask. "She's a good ship," he grunted as Nami and Naruto approached to say their goodbyes. "Foolish design, ridiculous figurehead, but she has a good heart." He took the pipe from his mouth and pointed the stem at them. "You look after her, and each other." His sharp eyes lingered on Naruto for a moment. "The sea can be a cruel master, but it respects strength. Show it no fear." "We will," Naruto said, offering a respectful bow. "Thank you for everything, Kato-san. For saving our home." "HMPH. Just doing my job," he grumbled, though a flicker of pride was visible in his eyes. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, flat object wrapped in oilcloth. He pressed it into Nami's hands. "A parting gift. It's a chart of the Serpent's Maw, the stretch of sea you're heading into. It's a graveyard of ships. The currents are a nightmare. And the fog, it's unnatural. This chart marks the safest known passage. It might save your life." Nami unwrapped it, her eyes widening at the intricate, hand-drawn details. It was a work of art. A masterpiece of cartography. "Kato-san, this is invaluable. We can't possibly." "Don't insult me by trying to pay for it," he cut her off. "Just get through it alive. That'll be payment enough." He put his pipe back in his mouth and turned his back, a clear dismissal. "Now get out of my port before you cause any more trouble." With heartfelt farewells, the Straw Hats cast off the mooring lines. The Going Merry, powered by a fresh wind and a gentle push from Naruto's currents, slid out of the canal and into the open sea. As Whispering Shoals shrank behind them, a cheer went up on the deck. They were free, they were whole, and they were back on their adventure. Nami took the helm, Kato's chart spread out before her. Naruto stood beside her, a comfortable, familiar presence. The synergy they had discovered in the escape from the storm had returned, tenfold. "There's a strong southerly cross current about 5 kilometers out," Nami noted, her finger tracing a line on the chart. "It could push us onto that reef system." "I feel it," Naruto said, her eyes closed. "I can create a counter-current to keep us on course. Just give me the heading." 3 degrees to starboard, Nami said without looking up from the chart. Naruto gave a subtle nod, and beneath the hull, an invisible river began to flow, a precise and powerful stream of water that kept the Merry perfectly on its path. It was a silent, beautiful dance of science and magic, of navigation and power. Luffy, perched on his special seat on the figurehead, laughed with delight as the ship seemed to navigate the tricky waters with a mind of its own. For several hours, their journey was idyllic. The sea was calm, the sky was clear. Sanji served a magnificent lunch on the deck, and Usopp regaled them with a wildly exaggerated tale of his rooftop battle against the fishmen. The tension of the past few days seemed a distant memory. But the Grand Line is a fickle beast, and its periods of calm are often just the deep breath it takes before it screams. It was Zoro, in the crow's nest, who spotted it first. "Ship," he called down, his voice sharp. "Aft of us, moving fast." Everyone tensed. Nami grabbed a spyglass, her heart beginning to pound a little faster. She focused the lens and scanned the horizon. She saw it, a black speck that was growing larger with alarming speed. It wasn't a marine vessel. And it flew no Jolly Roger. As it drew closer, its bizarre form became clear. It was long and slender, like a stiletto, and its hull was not made of wood or steel. It was a mottled, dark, green and black material that looked like corrupted coral or bone, fused together into a seamless, organic whole. It had no sails, yet it cut through the water with an unnatural silence and a terrifying speed, leaving almost no wake. It looked less like a ship and more like some monstrous, abyssal predator that had surfaced to hunt. "That's it," Naruko said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "That's Mizu's ship." Luffy's grin vanished. "Let it come," he said, cracking his knuckles. "We'll smash it to pieces this time." "No," Nami and Naruko said in unison. Nami turned to her captain. "Luffy, that thing is an assassin's tool. It's fast and stealthy. It won't engage us in a straight fight. It'll harass us, wear us down, and wait for an opening. And we don't know what other tricks it has." Naruko nodded in agreement. "It's designed for pursuit. Trying to out-brawl it is playing Mizu's game. We need to lose it. To use the sea against it." Her eyes met Nami's, a shared understanding passing between them. Nami looked down at Kato's chart. "The Serpent's Maw," she said. "It's a graveyard because it's unpredictable. The perfect place to lose a tail." "Get us there," Naruko said, her expression grimly determined. "I'll give us the speed." She walked to the stern of the ship, her hands outstretched over the churning water of their wake. A deep, resonant hum filled the air. The water behind the Mary began to glow with a faint blue light. The ship, which had already been moving at a good clip, suddenly surged forward as if kicked by an invisible giant. The acceleration pressed them all back, and the coastline began to fly by at a dizzying speed. Naruko was creating a massive, sustained current, a personal jet stream to carry them to their destination. On the pursuing vessel, Ms. Yu watched the Mary's impossible burst of speed. Its shifting, indistinct face showed no emotion, but a low hiss, like steam from a cracked geyser, escaped its form. It placed a hand on the bone-like tiller of its ship. And the vessel responded, diving partially beneath the surface, reducing its drag and increasing its own already formidable speed. The chase was on. For an hour, they raced across the open water. Two impossible ships defying the normal laws of sailing. The Mary, pushed by the raw, elemental power of a sea queen, and the abyssal vessel, driven by some dark, silent, and efficient technology. Despite Naruko's efforts, Mizu's ship was slowly, inexorably gaining on them. "It's no good," Usopp shrieked, looking through his goggles. "It's getting closer. It's going to catch us." "No, it won't," Nami said, her voice a bastion of calm in the rising panic. She pointed ahead. On the horizon, a thick, rolling bank of white lay across the sea, a wall that seemed to stretch from one end of the world to the other. "Welcome to the Serpent's Maw." They plunged into the fog moments later. The transition was instantaneous and disorienting. One moment, they were under the bright afternoon sun, the next, they were in a blind, white world. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The air grew damp and cold, and a strange, oppressive silence descended, broken only by the sound of their own ship cutting through the water. The log pose on Nami's wrist began to spin erratically, utterly useless. "I can't see a thing," Luffy yelled, his voice sounding strangely muffled. "Zoro, Sanji, port and starboard lookouts. Usopp, stay in the nest. Shout if you see anything. Rocks, the other ship, anything." Nami commanded, her voice ringing with authority. She was in her element now. This was a navigator's nightmare, and she was going to conquer it. She turned to the one variable she could count on. "Naruko, can you feel where it is?" Naruko stood at the bow, her eyes closed, her senses extended into the water around them. "It's still behind us, but it's slowed down. It's hunting." She could feel the subtle pressure displacement of its hull, the unnatural coldness of its corrupted energy. "This fog, it's not entirely natural. Kale's influence is in it. It deadens the water, makes it harder for me to read." The atmosphere on the deck grew thick with tension. They were blind, sailing through a ship's graveyard, being stalked by a shapeshifting assassin. Every creak of the hull, every drip of condensation from the rigging, sounded like a threat. "Rock, starboard," Sanji's voice cut through the fog. Nami adjusted the helm, but Naruko was already there. A current nudged the Mary's bow to port, guiding them safely past a jagged spire of black rock that emerged from the white mist like a rotten tooth. They spent the next hour navigating the treacherous maze, a seamless partnership of Nami's charts and instincts and Naruko's hydrokinetic senses. They were a single, cohesive unit, keeping the ship and its crew safe. But Mizu was a patient hunter. It had allowed them to go deeper into the fog, into the heart of its chosen battlefield. A sudden, violent jolt rocked the ship, throwing Usopp from his perch in the crow's nest. He was saved only by Luffy's quick stretching arm grabbing his ankle. What was that? Did we hit something? Nami cried out. No, Zoro growled from the port side. We were hit. He pointed his sword into the mist. Dark, serpentine shapes were moving in the water, their scales a slimy, corrupted black. They were massive sea snakes, but their eyes glowed with the same malevolent red light as the water soldiers in the town square. A distraction, Naruto said, her eyes narrowing. It's trying to draw us into a fight. The corrupted sea serpents struck, their massive bodies slamming against the hull. One reared up, its fanged mouth gaping, ready to strike the deck. But it was met with a spinning, flaming heel as Sanji launched himself over the railing. Diable Hambi. Flanchette strike. His fiery kick connected with the serpent's head, sending it crashing back into the water with a hiss of steam. Luffy stretched, his fists flying. Gomu Gomu no, Gatling. A barrage of punches hammered another serpent, driving it back into the fog. Zoro engaged a third, his swords clashing against its tough, corrupted scales. The battle was fierce, chaotic, and loud, the perfect cover. Nami was at the helm, trying to keep the ship steady amidst the churning water and the impacts of the attacking serpents. Her focus was absolute. She was charting their path, marking the locations of the rock spires they passed, trying to navigate her crew through the deadly chaos. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Good work, Nami. Let me take the helm for a second, you need to check the charts. It was Luffy's voice. She glanced back and saw him standing there, a wide grin on his face. But something was wrong. His eyes. They were his, but the light in them was cold, empty. And the real Luffy was still at the bow, pummeling a sea snake. Nami's blood turned to ice. Before she could scream, the hand on her shoulder morphed, becoming a thick, oily tendril that clamped over her mouth. Another wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet with impossible strength. The world spun, and she was pulled backward, over the railing and into the cold, silent embrace of the fog. The last thing she saw was Naruto's head snapping around, her eyes widening in horror as Nami was swallowed by the white abyss. A single, muffled splash was the only sound she made. On the deck of the Mary, the battle with the sea serpents ended as abruptly as it had begun. The creatures, their purpose served, dissolved into black water and dissipated. They're gone, Usopp yelled, his voice trembling with relief. But Naruto wasn't looking at the water. She was staring at the empty helm. Nami. The name hung in the cold, damp air. Sanji, who was never more than a few feet from the navigator if he could help it, spun around. Nami-san. Silence. A cold, dreadful realization washed over the crew. She was gone. For Naruto, the world narrowed to a single, terrifying point of focus. The silence wasn't empty. She could feel it, a new presence in the water. A small, warm, terrified life being dragged down into the cold, oppressive dark. Nami. Something inside Naruto, some ancient, primal dam, broke. The calm, controlled demeanor, the quiet strength, it all vaporized. The sea around the Going Merry began to boil. Not with heat, but with a violent, kinetic energy. The fog, for 100-meter radius around the ship, was blasted away by a concussive force of sheer will, revealing a churning vortex of black water. Naruto's eyes were no longer the color of the sky. They were the color of the abyss itself. A piercing, incandescent blue that burned with the cold fire of a dying star. She took her. Naruto's voice was a low, guttural snarl that barely sounded human. She took her. She didn't wait for a plan. She didn't wait for her crew. She launched herself over the railing and into the churning sea. The moment she hit the water, the transformation was instantaneous and violent. Her legs fused, not into the elegant, crimson tail the Straw Hats had glimpsed before, but into a longer, more powerful, weaponized form, edged with fins as sharp as obsidian blades. A shimmering, bioluminescent armor of hardened water, glowing with the same terrifying blue light as her eyes, formed over her torso and arms. She was not a mermaid. She was a living torpedo, a goddess of vengeance. With a sonic boom that cracked the very water around her, she was gone, a streak of blue light disappearing into the murky depths, following the fading, terrified warmth of Nami's stolen life. The crew could only stare in stunned silence at the raging whirlpool that was the only evidence of her passage. They had seen her power before. But this was something else entirely. This was rage, given the power of the ocean itself. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Kingdom in the Heart. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of freezing, disorienting black. One moment, Nami was on the deck of the Mary, the next. She was being dragged into the crushing depths by a creature of living shadow. The pressure was a physical blow, squeezing the air from her lungs, and the cold was a living thing, seeping into her bones. Her mouth was sealed by an oily tendril, and her limbs were pinned. Panic, sharp and primal, clawed at the edges of her mind. But Nami was a survivor. She had lived 8 years under the thumb of a monster. She had navigated the treacherous waters of the Grand Line in her own despair. Panic was a luxury she had long since learned to conquer. Instead of struggling wildly, she focused. She analyzed. The creature holding her, Mizu, wasn't just pulling her down. It was communicating, not with words, but with pure, chilling intent projected directly into her mind. She felt a cold, detached amusement. The curiosity of a scientist dissecting an insect. And beneath that, a deeper, more profound feeling, the possessive, obsessive will of Kale. He didn't just want Naruto dead, he wanted her captured. Broken, owned. Nami was the key, the bait, the tool for that purpose. The realization filled her not with more fear, but with a white-hot, defiant anger. She would not be a tool for anyone. She couldn't fight it with strength, but she could fight it with cunning. She focused on the tendril wrapped around her waist, on the shifting, unstable nature of its form. She had a small, single-section piece of her klima tucked into her belt. A hardy trick, baton, as Usopp called it, capable of generating small bursts of heat or cold. It was a pathetic weapon against a creature like this. But it was something. With a surge of adrenaline, she twisted her wrist, jamming the end of the baton into the tendril and pressing the button for a heat charge. The effect was minuscule, a tiny pocket of warmth in the freezing deep. But Mizu recoiled as if burned by a branding iron. The creature's form was a delicate balance of corrupted water and dark energy, the unexpected injection of pure thermal energy disrupted it. The tendril around her waist loosened for a fraction of a second. It wasn't enough to escape, but it was enough to prove a point. It could be hurt. A flicker of something akin to surprise. Then irritation, pulsed from Mizu. The hunt was proving more troublesome than anticipated. Naruto was a tempest. The moment she entered the water, the world of sound and sight vanished. Replaced by a universe of pressure, current, and temperature that she perceived as clearly as a hawk sees a mouse from a mile high. The water was her blood, her nerves, her very being. And right now, it was boiling with her rage. She was no longer thinking. She was pure, instinctual pursuit. Nami's life signature was a frantic, fading spark of warmth in the oppressive cold of Mizu's trail. It was a candle flame in a hurricane, and Naruto rocketed towards it with a single-minded focus that bordered on madness. Her path was not clear. The serpent's maw was Kale's territory. Abyssal creatures, twisted and warped by his corrupting influence, rose from the chasms to intercept her. A shoal of viperfish with teeth of black glass and glowing red eyes swarmed her. Naruto didn't even slow down. She sent out a pulse of pure kinetic force, and the creatures were simply unmade, their forms disintegrating in the turbulent water. A giant, armored squid lunged from a cave, its tentacles like corrupted pythons. Naruto's obsidian sharp tail fin sliced through them as if they were silk, and she passed through the creature's ink cloud without a change in velocity. These were not fights. They were annoyances being swept from her path. She broke through a thermocline into the crushing dark of the deeper sea, her own bioluminescence the only source of light. And then she saw it. A deep-sea chasm, a scar in the ocean floor. At its edge, the shifting, oily form of Mizu held the struggling, flickering light of Nami. Naruto arrived not with a sound, but with a change in the very fabric of the deep. The pressure for 100 feet around her tripled, the water itself seeming to recoil from her fury. Mizu turned, its indistinct face showing no surprise. It released the tendril over Nami's mouth, keeping her pinned with several others. It knew its quarry had arrived. So, the little queen comes to rescue her pet. Mizu's voice echoed not in the water, but inside Naruto's head. It was a chorus of chilling whispers. Did you come to die with her? Like your mother died for you? The psychological assault began again, but this time, Naruko was ready. You will not speak of her, she projected back. Her voice a low, resonant boom that vibrated through the water. And you will let Nami go. Now. Mizu laughed, the sound a discordant ripple of pressure. Or what? You will rage and boil the sea. Your emotions make you powerful, little queen. But they also make you predictable. A slave to your own heart. It gestured with a free tendril, and the dark water of the chasm rose to meet its call. But it didn't form soldiers or serpents. It formed a perfect, horrifyingly detailed illusion. The grand, pearlescent citadel of the Uzumaki kingdom, not as it was in its glory, but as it was in its death throes. She saw the flashes of dark energy, the crumbling spires, the bodies of her people dissolving into the corrupted water. And in the center of it all, her mother, Queen Kushina. Her crimson hair a banner of defiance as she faced down a shadowy figure with cold, dead eyes. Kale. Naruko froze, the memory of physical spear through her heart. She could feel the phantom cold, hear the phantom screams. Her rage, which had been a focused, incandescent spear, began to diffuse into a crippling, helpless grief. Mizu seized the opportunity. It formed a blade of solidified abyssal water, dark and impossibly sharp. And lunged not at Naruko, but at the helpless Nami. Nami saw the attack coming. She saw the hesitation in Naruko's eyes, the paralyzing power of the illusion. She saw Mizu's blade. Her mind screamed, and with the last of her strength, born of pure, defiant desperation, she did the only thing she could. She bit down, hard. Her teeth sank into the oily tendril pinning her arm. It tasted vile, like cold rot and static electricity. Mizu let out a hiss of pure shock. The sensation was alien, primal, a violation of its fluid, untouchable nature. Its concentration flickered. The illusion of the falling kingdom wavered for a single, crucial second. And in that second, Nami acted. She wrenched her freed arm, jamming the heat baton against Mizu's main body and firing it again. That tiny flash of heat, that spark of defiance, was all Naruko needed. It was real. It was tangible. It was Nami, fighting back, refusing to be a victim. It cut through the phantom pains of the past like a lighthouse beam through fog. The grief did not vanish. But the rage returned, colder, harder, and infinitely more focused. The illusion shattered, not with a bang, but with a quiet dismissal. The past was the past. The present was all that mattered. Naruko looked at Mizu, and for the first time, Mizu felt something it had never experienced. Fear. The girl before it was no longer a grieving princess. Her eyes held the ancient, implacable authority of a monarch on her own throne. You were right, Naruko projected, her voice calm, devoid of all heat, and therefore infinitely more terrifying. My emotions make me powerful. She raised her hands, palms open. But you were wrong about what that power is. It is not the rage of the storm. It is the certainty of the tide. She didn't attack Mizu's corruption. She didn't meet it with force. She simply willed it to end. The water around them began to glow, not just with her own blue light, but with a brilliant, pure white. The abyssal taint, the cold, dead energy of Kale's power, began to recede. It wasn't being pushed back. It was being cleansed, purified, the very nature of the element reasserting its life-giving properties over the corruption that had been forced upon it. Mizu shrieked as its own body began to destabilize. The corrupted water it used as its form was turning against it, rejecting its influence. It tried to flee, to dissolve into the darkness, but it was too late. Naruko closed her hands into fists. The newly purified water around Mizu compressed, forming a perfect, crystalline sphere. It was not a cage of force, but a prison of elemental purity, an environment utterly hostile to the creature's nature. This is my domain, Naruko declared, the finality of her words the judgment of a god. She squeezed. The sphere contracted, forcing Mizu's unstable form to collapse in on itself until all that was left was a single, small, shimmering pearl of black energy, which fell inert to the chasm floor. The battle was over. Naruko didn't spare it a second glance. She surged towards Nami, who was now limp, the last of her air having escaped her lungs moments before. She gathered her into her arms, her touch infinitely gentle. She pressed her lips to Nami's, breathing her own life, her own oxygen, back into her. Nami coughed, her eyes fluttering open. She was alive. She was safe. She was in Naruko's arms. Around them, the deep sea was silent and dark, illuminated only by the soft, fading blue light of Naruko's power. Naruko created a stable bubble of air around their heads, a tiny island of life in the crushing abyss. They simply floated there for a moment, in the silent dark, their foreheads pressed together. The terror, the rage, the desperation, it all washed away, leaving only a profound, shuddering relief. Nami lifted a trembling hand, tracing the strange, glowing patterns on Naruko's aquatic armor, then moved it to her cheek. In the cold, unforgiving darkness at the bottom of the sea, they were each other's only light. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. An Emperor's Gaze. The abyss was a silent, timeless place. Within the fragile bubble of air, the only sounds were the soft gasp of Nami's breath and the frantic, slowing beat of her own heart. The violent aftermath of the battle had been replaced by a profound, unnerving stillness. Naruko's bioluminescent armor, which had burned with the fury of a blue star, was now flickering, its light dim and unsteady. The exhaustion from her final, purifying attack was setting in with a vengeance, a deep, cellular weariness that was stealing the very light from her. She held Nami, her grip gentle but firm, a grounding point in the crushing emptiness. The rage was gone, leaving behind a hollow ache and a terrifying vulnerability. Nami, her body still trembling with the lingering cold and the adrenaline crash, reached up and cupped Naruko's cheek. The skin was cool to the touch. You were leaving," Nami whispered, her voice raspy. "Back there. When the illusion hit you. I saw it. You were letting go." Naruko closed her eyes, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "I saw her," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "My mother. I saw her die again." The memory was a fresh wound, torn open by Mizu's cruel art. "She didn't die for you to give up," Nami said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual iron. She moved, her hand from Naruko's cheek to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, forcing their eyes to meet in the dim, blue light. "She died for you to live, to fight, and you did. You came back, for me." The words hung between them, simple, true, and heavier than the weight of the ocean above them. It wasn't an accusation, it was an acknowledgement, a bond forged in the abyss, paid for in shared trauma and unwavering defiance. Naruko's flickering light seemed to stabilize at Nami's words, at her touch. The warrior goddess was gone, and in her place was just a girl, tired and scared, who had found something worth fighting for. "I'll always come back for you," she promised, the words a sacred vow made in the heart of the sea. "Good," Nami said, a shaky but genuine smile touching her lips. "Because we need to get out of here before you fall asleep and this bubble pops." Naruko managed a weak chuckle. "Right." With a visible effort of will, she controlled their ascent. There was no explosive burst of speed this time. It was a slow, gentle rise, like a single air bubble making its long journey to the surface. Naruko's armor dissolved back into the water, and her powerful tail softened, reforming into her legs. She leaned heavily against Nami, her energy almost completely spent. Nami, no longer the damsel in distress, became the pillar, wrapping her arms around Naruko, supporting her weak HT as they drifted upward through the silent, black water. They rose through the layers of the sea, from the crushing dark into the murky twilight, and then, finally, into the familiar, life-giving green of the sunlit depths. When they broke the surface, it was with a collective, shuddering gasp. The world was awash in the fiery colors of sunset. The oppressive, unnatural fog of the serpent's maw was gone, burned away by Naruko's earlier outburst of power. The sea was calm, its surface a mirror reflecting the glorious death of the day. And there, a short distance away, was the Going Merry, circling frantically, a tiny, lost ship in the vast, empty ocean. A shout went up from the crow's nest. "I see them, over there," Usopp's voice, cracking with relief. The ship turned sharply, making for them with all the speed it could muster. As it drew near, they could see the faces of the crew, a gallery of pure, unadulterated relief. Sanji was the first one over the side, using his skywalk to reach them in seconds. His face a mess of tears and frantic concern. "Nami Swan. Naruko-chan. Are you all right?" Zoro was at the railing, his usual stoicism completely gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded relief so profound it was almost shocking. Luffy stretched his arms, grabbing them both and pulling them from the water in a single, rubbery embrace, depositing them safely on the deck. The moment they were aboard, the exhaustion hit Naruto like a physical blow. Her legs gave out, and she would have collapsed if Zoro hadn't been there to catch her, his strong arm hooking under her shoulders. "Easy," he grunted, the word carrying a world of unspoken apology and respect. Nami, still shivering but running on pure adrenaline, immediately took charge. "She's fine, just completely drained. Sanji-kun, warm broth, high-energy food, now. Chopper isn't here, so we'll have to manage. Zoro, help me get her to our cabin." The crew moved with a swift, unspoken unity. This was their family, wounded but whole, and they closed ranks around their two returned members with a fierce, protective instinct. Nami and Zoro helped Naruto into the women's quarters, laying her gently on the bunk. She was pale, her breathing shallow, already half asleep. Nami shooed Zoro out, needing a moment of quiet. She pulled a warm blanket over Naruto, tucking it in with a practiced, gentle hand. She looked down at the Oman who had just descended into hell for her. Her crimson hair was damp and spread across the pillow like a splash of blood. Her face, in the soft light of the cabin's lamp, was peaceful, all the fire and fury washed away, leaving only a bone-deep weariness. An overwhelming wave of emotion washed over Nami, gratitude, terror, admiration, and something else, something warm and terrifyingly new that she couldn't yet put a name to. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of Naruto's jaw, her touch feather light. She leaned down, her own hair falling to curtain their faces, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to Naruto's forehead. "Sleep," she whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up." She sat in the chair beside the bunk, her bow staff resting against the wall, and took up her watch. She was the navigator, the protector, and she would not let any harm come to this girl. Not now, not ever. In the abyssal dark, where the pressure could turn steel to dust, Kale sat on his throne of bone and shadow. The shimmering sphere of water before him no longer showed the chaos of the battle. It showed the quiet, lamp-lit cabin of the Going Merry. It showed Nami's vigil. It showed the gentle, protective kiss. Kale was not angry. He was not disappointed. He was fascinated. A cold, clinical smile touched his pale lips. Triton, newly recalled from his humiliating post in the brine pits, knelt before the throne. His massive frame trembling, expecting his final punishment. "My emperor, Mizu has failed. The asset is lost. I am ready to accept." Silence. Kale's voice was a soft, sibilant whisper that cut through Triton's stammering. "Mizu did not fail. It succeeded beyond my wildest expectations." Triton looked up, his brutish face a mask of confusion. "I tasked Mizu with fracturing the girl's support system. With isolating her," Kale explained, his dead eyes fixed on the image in the sphere. "A flawed strategy. I was attempting to prune the branches, when I should have been studying the roots." He gestured at the sphere. "Look, Mizu did not isolate her. It did the opposite. It forced her to confess her past, strengthening her bond with those pirates. It threatened the navigator, and in doing so, it unlocked a new stratum of the girl's power. Not the chaotic rage of her mother, but the pure, focused, life-affirming energy of the first queen. The power to cleanse, to restore. A power I thought lost to myth." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, a predator who had just discovered a magnificent new weakness in his prey. "And the bond, this emotional catalyst, it is more potent than I ever imagined. The navigator is not the girl's weakness. She is her anchor, her battery, her heart." Kale's smile widened, a chilling, bloodless sight. "And if you want to control a creature, you do not swat at it with assassins in the dark. You take its heart." He stood from his throne for the first time, his slender, shadowy form unfolding to its full, imposing height. "My methods have been too subtle. Too patient. The time for whispers is over. It is time for a roar that the entire world will hear." He turned to Triton, his eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent light. "Commander, assemble the fleet, all of it. Set a course for the nearest major population center in this quadrant. The Kingdom of Alabasta." Triton's eyes widened in shock. Alabasta was a powerful, established nation, a member of the world government. A direct, overt assault was an act of war on a scale not seen in generations. "My lord," Triton stammered. "Alabasta, the world government will, the Marines will. Let them come," Kale said, his voice laced with the cold confidence of absolute power. "We will turn their precious desert kingdom into my new forward operating base. We will raise a tide of sea, erupted water that will choke their cities and salt their earth. We will put its people in chains and its princess in my dungeons." He looked back at the sphere, at the peaceful image of Nami watching over the sleeping Naruto. "We will create a tragedy so vast, so public, that the last Uzumaki princess will have no choice but to come to me. Not in secret, not in the dark, she will come begging me to stop. And when she does," Kale's cold smile became a predatory grin, "I will take her heart. Both of them, and this world's seas will finally belong to the abyss." A deep, resonant gong echoed through the throne room, a call to war that vibrated through the very bedrock of the ocean floor. From the dark chasms and abyssal cities of Kale's empire, a legion of monstrous warships began to rise, airborne white hulls leaving trails of black, corrupted water as they ascended towards a world that was utterly, blissfully unaware of the tide of death that was coming for it. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Calm and the Coming Storm. Naruto awoke to a world of gentle, rocking silence. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was. The familiar, crushing pressure of the deep was gone, replaced by the soft give of a mattress and the weight of a warm, woolen blanket. The air was dry and smelled not of salt and abyss, but of paper, ink, and the faint, sweet sharp scent of tangerines. She opened her eyes. The low, golden light of a lamp illuminated the small, neat cabin. Her gaze fell first on a set of meticulously rolled charts, then on a pair of small, potted tangerine trees on the windowsill. This was Nami's room. This was the going merry. She was safe. The memories of the deep, of Mizu's chilling whispers and Nami's terrified eyes, rushed back in a cold wave. She sat up with a gasp, a phantom pressure squeezing her chest. "Easy." The voice was a soft balm on her frayed nerves. Nami was there, asleep in a simple wooden chair beside the bunk, her head lolling to one side, her breathing deep and even. She had been woken by Naruto's sudden movement. In her lap, her bow staff was laid across her knees, as if she had been prepared to fight off nightmares in her sleep. She hadn't left. She had kept her promise. The raw, profound relief that washed over Naruto was so intense it almost brought her to tears. She wasn't alone. She would never be alone again. "How long was I out?" Naruto asked, her voice a dry, unused whisper. "About a day and a half," Nami replied, stretching with a groan, the fatigue evident in her movements. She stood and felt Naruto's forehead, her touch professional but her expression soft with a concern that was anything but. "No fever." "How do you feel?" "Empty," Naruto admitted. It was the only word for it. She could feel the ocean outside, its vast, powerful rhythms a familiar song. But her own connection to it felt distant, like a radio station shrouded in static. The wellspring of her power, which she had drawn from so deeply, was nearly dry. And starving. A wide, beautiful smile broke across Nami's tired face. "Good. That, I can fix." As if on cue, the door creaked open and Sanji glided in, balancing a tray with a steaming bowl of soup, a glass of juice, and a small flower in a vase. His usual hard-eyed swooning was tempered by a genuine, almost paternal relief. "Naruto-chan, you're awake," he exclaimed. "I have prepared a special restorative seafood consommé, rich in minerals and vitamins to replenish your divine energy." He set the tray down, his eyes lingering on Nami. "And for you, my Nami swan, a fresh tangerine mint tea too. Soothe your weary soul after your heroic vigil." Nami rolled her eyes, but the fondness in her expression was unmistakable. "Thank you, Sanji-kun. It smells wonderful." While Naruto ate, the soup warming her from the inside out, she felt the life returning to her limbs. Sanji and Nami filled her in on what she'd missed. They had cleared the Serpent's Maw and were now in a stretch of relatively calm, open water. The crew, shaken but resolute, had spent the day repairing the minor damage from the sea serpent attack and reinforcing the ship, a nervous energy keeping them all busy. When Naruto finally felt strong enough, she stepped out onto the deck. The late afternoon sun was warm, the sea a brilliant, placid blue. It was a scene of perfect peace, a stark contrast to the violence and terror of the past few days. Luffy was fishing off the side, Usopp sleeping in a deck chair with a half-finished blueprint for a Super Soaker Dial impact on his chest. Zoro was in the crow's nest, the right HMIC clang of his training weights the only sound disturbing the quiet. He saw her, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. He gave her a single, sharp nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. The animosity was gone, replaced by the unbreakable solidarity of a warrior who had seen another warrior's strength. Naruto walked to the bow, breathing in the clean sea air. She felt the ship alive beneath her feet. The atom wood massed a strong, steady spine. She placed a hand on the railing, closing her eyes, reaching out not with power, but with a quiet sense of belonging. This was her home. It suits you. Nami's voice came from the small, railed-off grove at the stern, her personal sanctuary. 3 healthy tangerine trees grew there in large crates, a living reminder of her home, of Belmere. It was a sacred space. One Nami rarely invited others into. Naruto walked over, her bare feet silent on the wood. Nami was tending to the trees, her touch gentle as she pruned a yellowing leaf. The quiet, Nami clarified. Not looking up. The peace. You look like you belong in it. I don't think I've ever really known it, Naruto confessed, leaning against the railing that enclosed the small grove. My whole life has been running. Surviving. Not anymore, Nami said, finally turning to face her. The afternoon sun caught in her orange hair, setting it ablaze. Her brown eyes were serious, vulnerable. Naruto. In the cave, and then in the water. She struggled with the words, the pragmatic navigator lost in a sea of uncharted emotion. I'm not used to people fighting for me like that. Not without a price. There's no price, Naruto said, her voice soft. You're my friend, Nami. My nakama. It felt like more than that, Nami whispered, the words so quiet they were almost stolen by the wind. She took a hesitant step closer. When I thought Mizu had broken you, and when I thought you were gone in the water, it was like the whole world was ending. I don't feel that for just a friend. The space between them was electric, charged with everything that had been left unsaid. The terror in the deep. The shared breath of life. The kiss on the forehead. Uko's heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had faced down monsters of the abyss without flinching, but this quiet, honest vulnerability, left her breathless. She reached out, her hand finding Nami's. Their fingers interlaced, a perfect, natural fit. Me neither, Naruto admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Nami's gaze flickered down to their joined hands. Then back up to Naruto's brilliant blue eyes. The fear, the doubt, the lifetime of walls she had built around her heart, they all seemed to melt away in the warmth of that gaze. She leaned in, and Naruto met her halfway. The kiss was not born of desperation or fear. It was gentle, hesitant at first, then deepening with a certainty that was as profound and undeniable as the tide. It tasted of salt and tangerines, of shared survival and a dawning, brilliant hope. It was a quiet promise made in the calm of the afternoon, a declaration that from the ashes of their violent past, something new and beautiful was growing. When they broke apart, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply stood there in the quiet sanctuary of the Tangerine Grove, their hands still clasped. Their foreheads resting against each other, the setting sun casting their 2 shadows as one on the deck. The peace was shattered by a frantic, flapping cry. A news coup, the world's feathered mailman, swooped down from the sky, dropping a neatly rolled newspaper onto the deck before banking away. Luffy, ever curious, was the first to grab it. Ooh, news. He unrolled it, his eyes scanning the front page. His grin vanished. The paper slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the deck. Sanji, curious, picked it up. His cigarette dropped from his lips, his face paling to the color of ash. No, it can't be. One by one, the crew gathered around, their calm, peaceful afternoon dissolving into a nightmare. Naruto and Nami, drawn by the sudden, deathly silence, left the grove, their hands still linked. Nami took the paper. The headline screamed at her in bold, black ink that seemed to drip with tragedy. Tidal wave of terror hits Alabasta. Desert Kingdom drowns. Beneath it was a photograph, grainy but horrifyingly clear. A massive, unnatural tidal wave, black and oily, was crashing over the port city of Nanohana. In the water, strange, bone-white warships could be seen, their forms monstrous and alien. And on the lead ship's flag was a symbol, a stylized, downward-pointing trident wreathed in abyssal tentacles. Kale's symbol. Her eyes scanned the text, her mind reeling. The article spoke of a sudden, unprovoked attack, a fleet that rose from the sea without warning. It spoke of a tide of corrupted water that didn't recede, but flooded the riverbeds, choking the land. It described the capital city, Alubarna, being surrounded, its people taken hostage. And then came the final, gut-wrenching paragraph. The royal family, the Nefeltari clan, has reportedly been taken captive by the invaders, Commander. Sources claim the attack is an ultimatum, a message to the world from a previously unknown power calling itself the Abyss Empire. The fate of King Cobra and his daughter, Princess Vivi, is unknown. Vivi, Nami whispered, the name a ghost on her lips. A cold, heavy dread settled over the ship. Their friend, the princess who had sailed with them, fought with them, who had become a part of their souls. She was in the heart of that nightmare. Naruto stared at the paper, her blood turning to ice. Her hands began to shake. This is because of me, she choked out, the guilt a physical, crushing weight. He's doing this to draw me out. He's torturing an entire country, to get to me. She pulled her hand from Nami's, taking a step back, the old instinct to run, to isolate. To bear the burden alone, rising like a specter. I have to go. I have to face him. No. Nami's voice was as hard and sharp as a diamond. She stepped forward, grabbing Naruto's arm, her grip unbreakable. Her eyes were burning with a cold, furious fire. You are not doing this alone. This isn't your fault. This is the act of a monster. And we, she said, her voice rising, her gaze sweeping over her crewmates. Do not let monsters hurt our friends. Zoro drew his swords, the sound of steel a deadly promise. I owe the princess a debt. And I have a score to settle with this, Emperor. Usopp, though his knees were knocking, raised his kabuto. Vivi is our friend. The brave Captain Usopp will not abandon her. Sanji's leg burst into flame, his expression murderous. To make a princess cry is a sin beyond redemption. I will kick this Kale so hard he'll land in the all blue. Naruto looked at them, at this insane, loyal, impossible family, all of them ready to charge into a war for her, for their friend. The guilt was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning resolve. She looked at Nami, at the unwavering strength in her eyes, and she knew she would never have to face the darkness alone again. All that was left was the captain's command. Luffy picked his straw hat up from the deck, his face shadowed, his expression grimly serious in a way that few had ever seen. He placed it firmly on his head. Nami, he said, his voice quiet, but resonating with the absolute certainty of a king. Set a course. Nami didn't need to ask where. She strode to the helm, her movements sharp and purposeful. The chart of the Grand Line was her battlefield, and she was its general. Alabasta, she declared, her voice ringing across the deck, a promise of retribution. We're coming. The Going Merry, its new mast a golden spear against the blood-red sky, turned its bow towards the coming storm. The war for the sea had begun. Chapter 10 End.